No problem. You learn.
All right, John, let's do it.
All right, you're ready to start.
Thank you. It is now 6 o'clock on Thursday, August 25th, and I will call this Lacey City Council work session to order. Mayor Ryder and Councilmember Greenstein will be absent tonight. Can I get a motion for our agenda?
Move to approve the 2-item agenda as published.
Second.
It is moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Seeing none. That passes unanimously. I did forget to mention that Councilmember Stedman is joining us remotely. There is one public comment, which will be entered into the record. And with that, we will get to our first agenda item, which is our quasi-judicial process, which will be presented by Rick Walk, our Community Economic Development Director.
Thank you. And also with me is Grant Beck, our Planning and Development Services Manager. And so we'll I'll kind of lead off the presentation. And of course, Grant will also include some comments and respond to questions as well. So again, this is a very important topic and a very, well, as we know, we've gone through the land use processes over the last year. There's been several cases coming before council. There's been a lot of challenges with that. So we thought we'd schedule this as an agenda item for your work session about the council's role in the quasi-judicial process and talk about what is that proper role. And so tonight I will go through a presentation of talking, recap some of the past briefings we've had. We'll talk a little bit about development process, because again, I think there's some maybe information needs to be shared about how development processes work at the staff level. And then we'll talk about some of the history of the quasi-judicial process and statutes in the state and what Lacey has done historically that maybe look at options for next steps. So with that, we'll start our presentation. And again, this is just to recap our past briefings with council about the quasi-judicial process. And as you can see on the screen, tonight will be the 5th time we've talked about this since 2009. And of course, we've been talking about this on an annual basis for the last 3 years. This is our 3rd year in a row to talk about this issue. One thing I want to just pick up on a little bit in 2011, Washington City Insurance Authority did an audit. Every once in a while, they do audit of city practices across the state, and they did. We were up for an audit, and they were focusing on land use. And through that audit, they identified 2 items that they felt that needed to be addressed. One mandatory and one heavily recommended. And the one heavily recommended, of course, was revisiting the council role in the quasi-judicial process because of that risk and liability. And the Washington City Insurance Authority, for those that may not know, are our insurance coverage that defends us in various lawsuits of any various action. And then also they're our insurance that will be part of the financial penalty if we are found in the wrong. So that's why they're concerned about that risk involved in council decisions. So again, our past briefings really focused on some of those liability traps for city councils. As you see on the list of those traps are community sentiment cannot be a basis for deciding land use. We also have different buckets of liability at the state and federal level. At the state level, there's a provision that decisions cannot be arbitrary and capricious, unlawful, delayed damages. Also, the appearance of fairness doctrine, which is probably the most common, now known and popular topic right now because of the recent land use cases. And then, of course, federal statutes and also the U.S. Constitution has some oversight in local land use decisions because you have due process violations, equal protection, and First Amendment rights unprotected in the Constitution. So a lot of land use cases get into constitutional law in the federal systems, and there's been a lot of court cases in the past dealing with that and violating a person's property rights. So this slide, you may not recognize, but we showed it before in a different format. But this is really kind of looking at the two columns of decisions that come before councils related to land use. One is the policy decisions. That's where the comprehensive plan decisions, zoning standards, zoning code or zoning designations, development regulations, environmental protection regulations, all those different things are policy decisions that set the tone and set the rules that council decides upon. Those are where you have the most discretion to deviate and set those goals. But as those rules are set, then you have less discretion because then it's a technical application. And also in terms of public comment and input and engagement with the community and having the community shape what those policies look like and what those decisions are, they have a lot of involvement at that policy stage on the left. But when you get to the implementation, it's more of a technical review of the rules and regulations in place. And there's less ability to address general neighborhood concerns that aren't related to something that doesn't fit code or a site-specific circumstance that needs to be mitigated. So as you can see on the right, there's a couple of site plans, and that technical review really looks at building design, building placement, parking lot layout, screening, buffering, landscaping, stormwater, traffic impacts, all those various pieces go into that technical review, and they're subject to the rules and regulations in place that are set on the policy decisions from the left. Also, there are those site-specific constraints and concerns that can come up and that may not be known, but come out through the public, engagement or public comment process or site evaluation. And those are things that if they are significant and are addressed by regulation, we can address them if there is a nexus to the issue and the project, the impact of the project. Next slide. So that, those are the kind of past slides were kind of really the focus of those past briefings, but this time we want to take a look at a little more in depth in what our development process looks like and what goes into reviewing a land use application, those steps, and then also who's involved in that review as well, just so that we make sure that everybody knows that there is a lot of work that goes into it. So this is a flow chart of our current project review cycle or process. It starts out with that pre-submission conference. And one thing I do want to note is a lot of times through the comments and engagement, because there is a lot of emotion related to land use, there's a lot of concerns, there's a lot of making sure there's compatibility with the neighborhood. All this is very valid and legitimate. But one of the challenges or one of the main comments we get is, well, it's just a rubber stamp process. Staff is aligned with big money or the big developers, that it's all predetermined. Well, to some extent it is, but we're not, the process isn't a rubber stamp. The reason why it may seem like that is the applicants and their consultant teams know and research the rules, and staff knows the rules as well. And so when that pre-submission conference comes in, some of the first things we look at is this even an allowed use under the zoning. If it's not, it doesn't go any further. If it is, then we inform the applicant and his team or their team that this is the process you have to go through. This is the steps. Here are the rules and regulations. Here are the issues you're going to have to address. And here's the technical studies you're going to have to do and the site evaluations that you're going to have to provide us. So it gives them all that information of what we expect of that process so that our staff can ensure that whatever is proposed is consistent with the city's rules and regulations and any site-specific issues are addressed. So as that pre-submission goes, the applicant goes away, puts together their package, and then they submit their application. At that time, our staff looks at it and verifies that all the pieces are there to start the review. And then it starts moving forward into the review step. Now, in that review step, there are things that can come up that, well, wait a minute, we're missing this analysis, or there's an issue out there that wasn't identified initially that we need to address. So all through that process, our staff will stop the review and ask for that additional information and make sure we're having a complete analysis. Now, that can happen more than one time as we go through this step because you get more information, that changes some of our review and okay, how's this fit? So that can continue on. And a lot of it has to do, a lot of the common stuff is like stormwater, test pit and making sure we have infiltration rates, those type of pieces. A lot of times it could be design. And as that process occurs, this is something that came up in a comment at our last meeting with one of the projects is, well, how did the project go from X number of units down to this? Well, you don't see a complete change because they're going back and amending their plans to meet our regulations. And even though a zoning may allow a certain number of units, by site constraints, by development constraints, that's what can reduce the number of units that ultimately can build on the site. And so it's going through that process of review. As we get to the stop clock and get all that information, and we go, continue on our analysis. Then we get to the stage where, okay, our final analysis, we have another pause there because we will not schedule a public hearing unless we can verify that a project is consistent with the city regulation codes and all site issues are addressed. Sometimes there's a difference of opinion between staff and applicant, their teams. And if there is, then the project may go forward, but then that difference of interpretation or regard is addressed in front of the hearing examiner who will make that decision. Also through this process, all the way along, we have public comment. We receive those public comments all the way from the application stage to the review to this analysis, and we're looking at those. And if there are things there that we are not aware of or didn't anticipate, we would look at addressing them. If they're something that's covered under our codes or not fitting or consistent with our codes, we will address them. So as we get to the point where we schedule the public hearing, we go to the public hearing before the hearing examiner. Now, part of state law 3670B states that in the quasi-judicial process, there can only be one consolidated hearing. And we say and one closed record hearing. And what that means is through that process, we also incorporate our environmental review. So that one hearing for the land use case is held before the hearing examiner. And if there is a SEPA appeal, then that's a closed record period tied to that same consolidated hearing timeframe. So when a lot of times there's a little bit of confusion because in our current process, and I'll jump ahead a little bit and come back, the hearing examiner is holding that one official public hearing. And then after that hearing is closed, then the record is closed and everything they're going forward is reviewed on that record. Even though there may be a council meeting ultimately look at, the hearing actually occurred at that hearing examiner level based on state law.
And that's true for appeal too. The Superior Court will also be looking at that record.
Yep. And that's the state law. This also indicates that all the record is established at the local jurisdictional level. So the hearing examiner holds a hearing. He takes in public testimony. He takes in, reviews all the record and materials. He, did I say he? Because our hearing examiner, he looks at staff analysis, also looks at this applicant analysis, and takes all that information and say, okay, they're verifying that all that work is remaining consistent with the codes and addressing any outstanding issues. One thing that we do when we look at this and look at consistency, one of the ways for consistency is determine if some consistency with local regulations can be met by conditions too, and the hearing examiner will impose those conditions as well. Now, there's a lot of, you hear a lot of frustration from public, especially neighbors about, well, we're not really heard in this process. Well, the hearing examiner does look at all their testimony and he looks at it and say, what is the stuff that the basis of site-specific issues or inconsistency with codes. And there are instances where the hearing examiner had testimony at a hearing. I was involved in a land use case, a subdivision project around 2004, 2005, where there was some site-specific situation or issues on the site that only the neighbor knew about. And it didn't pick up in the field analysis or site inspections by staff. And so when that came up, the neighbor brought the issue up. It wasn't known by staff or the applicant's consultant team. The hearing examiner stopped the hearing, continued it, and allowed time for staff and the applicant to go out and investigate. And we found that there was some stormwater issues that really needed addressed. And so that delayed that process for another 6 months until that was rectified. And ultimately, it changed the design of the project, and ultimately went back to hearing, was approved. But that was a catch that was brought up by testimony from a neighbor that was related to the site, to the codes, and a discrepancy. So there is ways that it works, but a lot of this work is done by site analysis and by both the applicant consultants as well as staff to get to that point. So again, the hearing examiner does look at all that record testimony and then offers his recommendation ultimately. So that recommendation then goes to council in our current process. And generally it's a 30-day process from when the recommendation is issued to when council would consider it. So then council takes this record, and there's two projects right here that kind of demonstrate the paper versions of the record. Of course, council gets it electronically. That's all the information and review of those two projects that now council in 30 days will need to take a look at and sort through and make sure and verify that the hearing examiner got it right based on the laws, rules, and regulations of the city and the record of the testimony. the challenge of that, of course, is it's under the appearance of fairness doctrine. You can't have any ex parte communication. That means not only with the public, the developer, or even with staff. And so you're looking at that on your own, trying to discern under the rules and regulations how to make that land use decision. So once council action happens, then the next steps. And again, came out of some of the questions and commentaries of the last meeting. We wanted to show, there was questions like, well, how is this condition of this road improvement going to be actually put in, installed, and how is it going to be ensured that's going to be met? Well, that land use decision occurs about the middle of the process of the overall project development. After the council action, then you have the appeal period, which is 21 days to file appeal to Superior Court under the Land Use Petition Act. And then you go into the construction drawing phase of the project. And so one of the first steps of review is design review. Sometimes that can be incorporated with the land use decision, but a lot of times it's after. So they have to submit a design review application and make sure all the buildings are designed to our standards for aesthetics and screening and privacy. And then you also get your grading, your site work drawings, your grading permit applications. That is submitted. The building department reviews that to make sure that all grading activities are in line with the building codes, as well as other department staff review it to make sure it's in line with the land use decision, the conditions of approval, as well as the approved site plan. And then you go into the civil review. That's where you get into all your infrastructure and roadway improvements. All that again is multi-departments reviewing that to make sure that it meets city standards and meets the approval that was issued by the city on the land use and the conditions. And then you go in your site construction. And one of the steps we do when we go into site constructions, we hold pre-construction meetings with the contractors, again, to make sure that plans, regulations, and expected process for construction activities, all the way through building permit, and then ultimately project completion and closeout. So all that time, so in the top half, when you go through the entitlement process from pre-sub to council action, a very efficient project would be about 3 months, but most of these projects go 8 months to 18 months of review before they actually get to council. And then after that process, they go through another roughly 18 plus months to go from getting their civil drawings and their construction drawings approved before they break ground and actually build the building and occupy it. So it is quite a long process, and a lot of local eyes, in a sense, and the city staff is looking at this project to ensure the city regulations set by council are met. So this slide is just kind of going a little bit more detail on some of those steps. One of the things we really wanted to articulate is in that application, there is a lot of technical information that's required. This is the normal type of information that we generally require on any land use application, where it's a checklist, environmental checklist, wetland report, tree reports. Our forester goes out and assess it and identify saved trees. But also too, a lot of people don't know is when we go out there, there may be a group of trees that normally could be saved, but they might have some disease issues. A lot of times, especially in the Northeast area, you have that laminated root rot. So even though they may look like they're buffer trees and we'll save, they're eventually those roots are decaying and they're going to be hazards to the adjoining properties. And so you go to the replanting plan based on our ordinances. That's one example. But you have your landscape plans, shoreline environmental assessments, traffic studies, geotech report, all that stuff comes in and starts that review process. And then on the right is a column of all the various departments and staff that go in and look at this, any type of application. You have, of course, the public I have the opportunity to comment and assess it, but you also have planning, building, fire, stormwater review, our city arborist, like I mentioned, public works development review, reviewing to make sure that the technical stuff is for infrastructure is set, transportation, stormwater. The ones that are highlighted in the kind of brown are the 5 primary that review, and those eyes are set on that. Then also you have your other outside agencies and departments that also weigh in on these projects. Everything from Department of Ecology, Orca, School District, Washington. Yes.
Just curious, what does Washington Revenue, what's their part in this process?
Well, they have a role in some applications, especially with forest practices permits.
For what?
Forest practices permits.
Forest practices permits.
And because forest practices permits are basically a permit process that we took on from the State Department of Natural Resources, and it's to make sure that they're tracking harvesting of timber, and it's being coded and taxed appropriately.
Okay.
And of course, we also work with the local tribes, the Squaxin and the Squally tribes, and work with their comments, especially on archaeological sites as well. So there's a lot of view. And in this, in the city staff, there's a lot, I want to highlight this a lot, because through these processes, again, there is a lot of input and concern raised by the public, and a lot of those comments, again, accuse staff of rubber stamping or working with developers, but our staff are very dedicated. We have a lot of experience at the city of Lacey in our staff, and they are very professional, dedicated, and they really do want to make sure that the city's regulations are met, but they also want to be a resource and information. And so anybody can come in, call, or set up an appointment to sit down and talk about projects. And that's one of the things I've noticed over the years, that we're seeing less and less of that, especially from neighboring properties that's actually contacting us to get information about projects or talking about it. One of the things too that we always have to explain the process, and that's a lot of the inquiry we have. And our staff says, well, this is a quasi-judicial process. You can't talk to counsel because of ex parte communications. Here's the reasons why. There's a lot of pushback there because there's, the citizen wants to be able to talk to an elected official. And but with the process, they don't. But so our staff, here's everything from you can't stop me to we're going to report you to the ethics board, those type of things. Because at that point, there's a challenge of trying to look at a process and say, this is what the process is, and here's how you can best engage with it versus somebody being hearing no and reacting. So that's one of the challenges that the staff has to deal with. But also, again, I say that because they're really there and they want to be that resource. They want to provide information, want to help people engage in the most effective way in these processes and serve the entire community.
You're saying I'm a process nerd, aren't you? I'd also point out add that on the staff review team, the review, it's not a team, it's not an individual sport, it's a team sport. So not only we don't just get the projects and review and we send our comments back. There's a lot of meetings with the entire team. There's a lot of eyes on it together to have that back and forth. Well, what about this and what about this? Because there's a lot of different disciplines and everything's related to everything. So you push one place. So it's not just a rote review. It's actually very organic.
And with this, we have layers too, because we have lead reviewers, but there's, as Grant said, there's other support and issues or interpretations or things that have to be worked out, kind of elevate, and you get everybody involved in some manner or focus. And so just in our current plan alone, I just want to talk about this. We have 5 individuals that are pretty frequently involved in various land use, and just on that, those 5 individuals, the average experience level is 18 years of experience of working specifically land use and planning and current planning implementation. So again, they're there to help. They're there to be a resource and make sure the city regulations are met.
And an average time with the city of Lacey of 11 years. And I think I brought that down quite a bit, but it's
Yes, you'll raise it eventually.
done with this one.
Yes, I think so. So this next phase, I just want to talk a little bit about the development process, and just want to pause and make sure there's any questions on that process. So ask questions.
Just a comprehension check for me. So the determination of consistency process that RCW 3670 talks about, the way it looks for Lacey is actually there's at least three different parties sort of working together on that. It's the city staff that does the review early in the process, and then it's the hearings examiner, and then it's the council. And each of those groups has an opportunity to look and make sure that what is on the plan is consistent with our zoning regulations.
That's correct in our current process. And so the hearing examiner finalizes that record, then council just verifies that it was done, they got it right.
And then the post land use process, there's, everybody who touches it is also looking back to that land use decision to make sure that the conditions that were attached by the hearing examiner and affirmed by council are being met. Yep.
So prior to pre-sub, you have the landowner who hires a consultation team to go and see if what they have in mind will work for that parcel. How long do you think that process for them takes?
Prior to coming in for pre-sub, a lot of times we start hearing about somebody's interest in a parcel. You know, it can depend, but we'll get a phone call and our planner of the day or whoever receives that phone call will take that and they'll ask some general questions. We'll do some research and say, well, yeah, this is not allowed, but you know, this type of project is, or this use is. And as they're looking at property purchase, or even if they already own it, they're looking at what that process may look like. And so there's some preliminary conversations, but it really varies whether the timeframe, I mean, they start thinking, hiring their consultants and figuring out what they want to do for a project to the point they come in for a pre-sub. You know, but we field those general inquiries all the time. And then we always guide them to that pre-sub process because really at that table, we have an opportunity to understand what they want to do, but we also have the ability to say, this is all the rules and regulations that need to be met. And, you know, referring back to that primary staff team, all those individuals are in there at that point in time. So not only are they getting early information, but they're also providing early information about the rules and regulations.
This is one of the reasons why I asked that question is because I noticed on one of the projects that got approved this year, it looked like some of their work went back as far as 2017, and here we are in 2022, and it got approved. So is that, I'm not asking if that's typical, but I guess what I'm assuming is that long before we hear from them, they have already been trying to put something together, testing soils, doing different activities, just to see if they can even cut the mustard on this parcel several years in advance. Is that?
That's correct. And if it's, you know, older information, we're going back and verify, is that still accurate, or things can change, conditions change, have rules change. We make sure that our staff makes sure that that information is still current at the time of application and the time they submit that application. And there are instances where there's been past, I guess, site analysis that has carried forward over time, and the multiple projects that have attempted to move forward have tried to use. I mean, there's soils information, historic soils information, those type of things that on properties that, yeah, they can be carried forward, but we do verify that everything's still accurate and we determine if it's something that'll be acceptable.
Yeah, I noticed that on one of those, it said that they went, I couldn't remember the exact number, but it was almost, they had to drop 40% of the amount of units that they were going to originally propose to do. Does that sometimes scare people away or like kill a project?
It can, yeah. And we see a lot of people come forward with a project and they start looking at that assessment, and that goes to the site here at the capacity and suitability. And if it doesn't pencil, because they want to have to figure out what all that development cost is, also the carrying cost of any type of construction loans to build out into pro forma what they get return on that investment. So they have to actually have a financial pro forma to figure out how it works. And they usually have a break-even point identified in terms of whether it's number of units or square footage or whatever that type of project they're doing, whether it's residential, commercial, or industrial.
So
And ties into that too is mitigation fees. We have school mitigate impact fees. We have transportation impact fees, not only for the city of Lacey, Thurston County, and so all that comes into play as well. And there are times where you might have offsite physical improvements that may have to occur if something drops below a level of service standard. And those are things that are identified early in that process through like the traffic analysis. And again, there's sometimes a lot of debate on whether something should or should not. And usually we say, you got to make these improvements to make capacity. And that's what we're proposing if this project goes forward.
traffic signals, roundabouts.
Correct. Sidewalks beyond the actual frontage of a particular project. I'll just, if there's a pedestrian generator and a tractor or bus stops and we need to have a safe route of pedestrian travel, we will oftentimes require that because we have a nexus between the impact of the development, the need, and for them to be able to have to put those improvements in.
And our local policy is adopted as part of our pedestrian and bike plan.
And that's the value of those planning process. We just adopted that pedestrian and bicycle plan, 4 years ago, Brian? And before that, we were always having to do that in the analysis. But in that pedestrian bicycle plan, why it's so powerful is we identified linkages that are not there. And so we can refer back that that's a planning process or a planning policy. And so that reinforces our ability to require that from a developer with their project.
And then that also, there was the analysis by the Public Works Department and the Transportation section that made that connection and looked at the projects together and said, yes, there's enough people that would be normally walking there that this is unwarranted and is a nexus with the transportation, with the intercity transit. So.
And so that reinforced that transportation policy. Yes.
If I may, Rick, can you explain to people that wouldn't normally understand that we have limited processes to do permitting and land use? If I recall correctly, there's only 3 other ways we could do this. The quasi judicial is just one, right? And all have, positives and negatives. Can you explain that?
Yes, we'll talk about the council's role. We're coming up next once we kind of get through the questions of this previous development process segment. But we'll go into the state authority for quasi judicial process and what the council currently is under and what options the council has and how they participate in that process. Or not.
Perfect. Thank you.
So Rick, I have a question and let me ask it and we may want to come back to it as we go further through this, but I'm concerned about the public's ability to know early enough into the process that something is planned for the area they live in so that they can ask questions and stuff and be on the ground floor before it actually gets to the hearing examiner, because I know they have the public hearing, but often people don't know about it and it's too late and it leads to a lot of frustration. So, and I know if we change it up, that may change things a little bit, so.
Well, we're always open to figure out how best we can communicate with the public. With our land use permitting processes, we still have a process that's basically prescribed by state of steps and that quasi judicial element. But when an application is accepted as complete, the site's posted. If it's with the notice of application signed, especially for those that require public hearings, that's the first step. Usually, word of mouth is the best because neighborhoods, will share that message and start post. That's the first step. And then when we get to the hearing stage, then there's a direct mailing out to property owners within, I think it's 300 feet from the project site. But also, we also now use social media to get information out. Our website is now posting information. So there are ways we've added on to how we get the notification out. But that is always something that is open. We always look at how we can do better and what can we do to make it be more effective.
But to kind of the underlying part of your question, that place is actually on the policy development side of this slide. Because we're obligated, and Rick will get into this in a bit in some of the enabling legislation for permitting, but we're bound to review a project based on the development regulations, not anything else. So where you can be effective is in the development of the comp plan and then the subsequent updates of those, the zoning code, subdivision code, all those development regs.
And the other thing too is, yes, we want to try to get people to be aware. It's really hard to know if somebody's out there kicking the tires until they contact us. And then we don't even have an application to know if it's real to be able to let somebody, hey, there's somebody kicking the tires out here. But also too, the public has every ability to find out information about their property and the properties around them, just like a property owner wants to do something to their property or a prospective a developer.
Can I also comment on that, Rick, real quick?
Yeah.
Because they also have input. Because case in point, I live north of the freeway and I've lived here since 1989, not as long as Ed or Andy, he was born here, but all I heard for many decades was there's no gas station, there's no store. It takes me 20 minutes to go, across the freeway to get whatever I need. So that is input. At some point, there has to be input back saying, okay, now we have enough gas stations or grocery stores or whatever it is, it goes both ways.
Yes. Yes, and again, as Grant said, there's the policy side, but then there's the permitting side. But I'm kind of getting to is, there's properties that are undeveloped around some, they go, what's the plan for that property? And the best resource is their local planning department. And go to the counter and ask, what's this property zone? What can be done on it? And then they have some more awareness. And if it's something they don't like, before anybody actually submits an application for it, they can start asking, was this something that should be readdressed? And every year we have the annual comprehensive plan cycle that people can start that policy discussion. And if we're aware of it, or there's an issue out there, we can start, or council can raise the issue too. And part of that joint planning with the planning commission.
Can we go back to the flow chart?
Yeah.
That right there. So where in there is the first time the public gets any notice that, somebody's got a plan?
The first application bubble is where
The
we post this.
pre-sub?
Yep.
No,
the application buzz, I'm sorry.
Second
Oh,
level.
okay, the second one.
Yeah.
Okay, so then it's like, hey, there's an application in for this parcel. Everybody gets to know.
Everybody gets to know. As soon as we get we deem the application complete, which is all the technical documentation required to submit. As soon as we get everything we need.
And that pre-submission, it's like a 45-day notice, right? Something like that?
No, well, and that notice of application for any quasi judicial matter has the sign posted, we issue it through the website and other ways. It's a 14-day comment period. It doesn't mean that at 14 days, no more comments can be accepted. It just means that there's no action that can be taken by the city in 14 days. Back when I first started, and Grant as well, I'm sure, there were projects that, used to be could approve in a week and a half. And so that's why the legislature enacted that 14-day process under 3670B was just to assure that there was no action taken before the public had a chance to review a project. But that whole opportunity to comment and engage and continually engage in the process doesn't stop there. It goes all the way up to the hearing examiner until the hearing examiner closes the record and say, okay, the record's now closed and here's the recommendation.
So at the application stage, that stack of paper becomes public information.
Correct. And the pre-sub, any pre-sub we get, that's all public record too. And people can sign on and be notified of pre-sub agendas that are produced every 2 weeks. So they can see what projects are coming into the city.
Okay, so then if at the application stage, that becomes public information, at what point do we mail out to everybody that's within 300 feet?
Right, about 14 days before the public hearing. That's the notice of the public hearing. So let me back up. You said when the application is complete?
Yeah, okay, so we know that it's public information at application, right?
Right.
But there's also a point where we notify the public by mail, did you say?
No, I'm sorry. Let me back up and explain. When we receive the application, we have 28 days to review that application, determine if all the components are there. Once we determine the application is complete, we issue the notice of application, and that application becomes vested under all the rules and regulations at that time. When we issue that notice of application, that's when the public notice officially goes out. The site is posted with a sign, and we post it on the website, and I think other measures. And then as that review continues, the next time there's an official notice that goes out about the application is the notice of the public hearing. And that goes out 14 days prior to the public hearing with a notice of the paper, website, social media, and then also direct mailing to property owners within 300 feet.
So that's gonna be like within 30 days of that 3-month stretch. So within 30 days, the public's gonna know there's an action planned, or we have an application for this parcel, this lot, this undeveloped piece of area.
Correct.
And just understand, at time of application, the law is frozen. There's no changes to the
Right.
law, to the zoning, to anything relating to the rules associated with that application from the moment it's filed.
Right.
Status quo ante.
Yes.
Yep.
And so, and further, I guess one more comment. Nothing that council may be considering today by way of whether to adjust the quasi judicial process. None of these notice provisions are going to be affected by that.
Right.
These are all separate and apart.
We know we can't just change the
Yeah.
law because we have a feeling
This is
about.
just additional information, I think, that Rick's provided, just to provide the full context.
And as we get to the, I just wanted to follow up to you with that pedestrian path example and having the analysis and the comp plan policy to be able to require that. Just the same, if we didn't have a comp plan policy or we couldn't make it work through the analysis, we couldn't just require it because we wanted to, because then there would not be a direct relationship between the development and that impact. And so we have to make sure that, and our staff is very good at following a lot of case law. There's a lot of case law on that, nexus and proportionality, that we make sure that what we require is supported by policy, supported by regulations, or supported by some type of analysis that demonstrates the impact and the relationship to the mitigation factor. So now let's go into kind of the background of the quasi-judicial authority. There's quite a bit of history of this in the state. I want to start way back. The state legislature adopted a 35 RCW 35A 63110. RCW 35A is the optional code city provisions. And in that, the legislature said that for cities over 2,500 in population, had to create a board of adjustment. Okay.
Can we move the bubble there? Thank you.
Had to create a board of adjustment to hear variances, appeals, and other quasi-judicial matters. At this time, when this was created, subdivisions were under the purview of planning commissions. Now, the board of adjustment is typically a 3-member board of appointed citizens that would adjudicate land use applications. And those board of adjustment by state law were final, appealable to Superior Court under the Land Use Petition Act. So board of adjustments are, I don't know if there's any left in the state, are there?
I doubt it.
I haven't heard of a board of adjustment for eons. I had early in my career had some a window of experience with a board of adjustment over in Douglas County. And it was somewhat eye-opening because I remember one of my experiences was we had a 2-item agenda. It was a 7 o'clock start. They didn't adjourn until 2 a.m.
Oh.
And because there's all this, you have citizens working with citizens and relationships and trying to figure out what's right. And I have to say, there's not many good decisions made after midnight. But it was, it was just a process that was very challenging. And this was exemplified across the state. So based on that and the challenge of predictability, the appeals that were occurring, and the state legislature then enacted another provision in the optional municipal code 35A 6170, which established the hearing examiner system and authorized cities and counties to adopt a hearing examiner system to deal with quasi-judicial matters.
And that was in the 70s.
That was in the 70s. And then part of that too, because planning commissions were hearing subdivisions, they also incorporated in the subdivision law, which is 5817, the same provisions that local jurisdictions, cities and counties can adopt the hearing examiner process to review subdivisions. And I know you received some correspondence and it talked about those provisions, but that was really related to subdivisions. And we operate both with the subdivision law, but also RCW 35A as our state authority to do certain actions, especially in land use.
That's the RCW that we're organized under, so we are subject to all the regulations in 35A63. Great.
Yep. So then in the 90s, after the adoption of the Growth Management Act in the late 80s, the state legislature also established RCW 3670B and C, and these are provisions that support the Growth Management Act and comprehensive planning and empowering those comprehensive plans. But 3670B was really focused on setting the tone that requires project decisions be based on development regulations. And this is that provision that Grant was referring to earlier. Also, that's where the statute comes that limits a review process to 1 open record and 1 closed record hearing. And the whole idea was trying to get some uniformity, predictability, and efficiency for the permitting process for the public, the developers, as well as the city.
So for those of us who weren't here before 70B, it appears as though projects were based on something other than development regulations prior to.
Yep, there are a lot of decisions that were made based off of public sentiment or, and there's a lot of influence of developers. There's a lot of influence of the public. There was a lot of things happening and it was trying to create uniformity and consistency with the adopted comprehensive plans. And it goes back to the evolution of planning in the state of Washington with, started out with the Planning and Enabling Act back in the early 30s. That, that time you didn't have, you can authorize local governments to adopt plans, but you didn't have to follow them. So you'd want to have a development activity or, hey, somebody wanted to, do a spot zoning, and a lot of that would become arbitrary and capricious. And so there's a credit with the GMA and these 3670B was trying to create some uniformity and consistency with the comp plan and the policy decisions of the city.
And I'd say even further, case law over the years has clarified that no, if the development regulation says something that's in the plan says something else, you don't do the something else, you do with the development regulation. So really this just codified kind of the judicial nature of land use decisions. Is that fair, Dave?
And then tie it back too is it also says your development regulations are to be consistent with your comprehensive plans. And so that's where they get that connectivity. And so that really creates the opportunity to create that community vision. Then in 3670C, that established that judicial review process of local permit, that more formal, based on the record. Any party in standing can appeal any type of decision that's made in that quasi-judicial process. So it could be anybody that participates, a neighbor, a community member, the developer, anybody with standing can appeal a decision. And then of course, as Grant mentioned earlier tonight, the review is always going to be limited to the record created by the local government. Yes.
Are there any limitations on who has?
It's pretty broad. I thought
There definitely would be definitely prove standing before the court will accept jurisdiction of the case, and I'd have to look exactly what those requirements are going to be. So if you have a personal interest in the outcome of the matter, if you're related to the matter in some regard, certainly if you're a party, but you're going to have some sort of nexus with the.
That's it. Be able to show some type of impact with the decision.
But I don't have the recitation right now.
But also too, if somebody participates in the comment process, whether they have impact or not, that also gives them standing as well. So you can have some type of advocacy group that's from Eastern Washington that's watching the land use decision, they participate in the process, then they can ultimately could have standing in that.
That's kind of what I was wondering is could people who are not from here even weigh in on the decisions that we make through this appeal process?
If they aren't have direct impact or injury, like Dave said, they have to have some type of participation in the process.
Apologize in advance for this one.
Yeah,
There's a lot of words.
it is, and we're going to summarize it, but we just want to throw the whole thing up. So in creating the opportunity for the hearing examiner process to be used by the local jurisdictions, the state legislature set some guidelines for that, what the hearing examiner can decide. You can see up there, and I think you're pretty well familiar with it right now. It's anything with a quasi-judicial matter, appeals of administrative decisions, and application that's just subdivision, shorelines, or any of those other type of things. And the councils or the governing body of the local jurisdiction can also have three options on how they participate or how they empower that hearing examiner. Option A, which is the option that we're currently under, the decision may be given the effect of a recommendation to the council. Option B, the decision can be a final decision subject to appeal to the council. Or option C, except for rezones, the hearing examiner decision can be a final decision appealable to Superior Court and LUPA, very similar to the old Board of Adjustment statute. Now, again, I just want to clarify that we're here to help, with information and be a resource. We did also, receive some correspondence last night that talked about these options that the council has, and it indicated that we're operating under C, but we need to go to A. And if we had been contacted and we could have been able to provide some information and guidance of what we're structured and what those different options are. And so it's just a matter of reaching out and to these type of resources. So in Lacey, the Lacey City Council first established the hearing examiner office and LMC 2.30 in 1979. With that action, before that, the city was operating under a Board of Adjustment provision. So with that action, they transferred those duties of the Board of Adjustment to the hearing examiner and repealed the Board of Adjustment ordinance and disbanded it. Over time, there's been some amendments to the LMC 2.3, the hearing examiner stat or ordinance. In 1990, it also included a review of appeal of building code decisions. In 2003, we consolidated in one place all of our different processes into Chapter 1, and so that we also had to amend the hearing examiner ordinance at that point, and then also we made sure it was still consistent with 3670B. And then in 2003, the council decided to make the decisions on building code appeals be final at the hearing examiner level and repealable to Superior Court. And then same thing in 2014, the council decided to take nuisance dog complaints that come out of JASCOM, Joint Animal Services. Those appeals would go to the hearing examiner, that decision be final, appealable to Superior Court. So there's been some steps the council has taken to address the role that council or other bodies have in some of these matters. So again, why hearing examiners now as opposed to the Board of Adjustments or some other venue? And again, hearing examiners are generally legally have training in legal land use law, as well as other legal procedural processes. They also, with that review and history of case law, they can ensure and enhance the quality of some of the decisions. This also separates the quasi-judicial function more, have a little more separation between quasi-judicial and legislative functions, if they're the final decision, because then you have that process of engagement and back and forth in the legislative process, but all of a sudden you have to shut it off in that quasi-judicial process. So the hearing examiner creates it.
It's the only form of government where legislators also sit in the role of judicial.
Yeah.
You know, separation of powers all through state and federal government.
This
This
weird thing.
this is an anomaly for that.
And then, of course, it also frees policymakers to act on long-term planning and lawmaking functions. We would see that because, again, if you have an issue and you can't talk to the public, I use this recent, the neighbor commercial, the Meridian Market Fuel and Gas. There is a lot of concern about those provisions, and there was no opportunity to talk with their elected bodies or staff to be able. But tonight, we're going to be talking about reviewing a neighbor commercial zone. That Meridian Market application, I think, was 18 months, 20 months or something since it started. We could have started conversations about the neighbor commercial districts 12 months ago with the public, with the council, if council wasn't involved. So that's one example of how it does free up policymakers to focus on those long-term planning and address those issues, even though you may not be able to address that specific land use because it's vested under the laws. It's frozen. The laws are frozen. You could be working on those issues and start early on addressing it in other locations if it's appropriate. So that's
We were using option A.
if you're using option A. Yep. Excuse me. Option C. Option C. Thank you. And then, of course, it protects the decision maker from political pressure, and that can come from all different sides. It can come from citizens. It can come from developers. It can come from different ways. So when we say political pressure, that happens in many facets over the years. So then, always the question is, what are other cities doing? And this is more of just a slide. Sorry for the small text, but we're trying to just kind of show the number of cities we looked at. Grant went and actually to Code Publishing Company started pulling up other city codes and trying to determine how many out there were using the hearing examiner model and how they, if that hearing examiner model was a recommendation or final. And out of the 175 cities in the state of Washington, I think you said you were able to find 85 or
I got through about 85 codes. I have no life.
yeah. And out of those 85, there are only 2 that had the hearing examiner as a recommendation. Lacey and Bremerton.
Good company.
Yeah. And we'd say that too, because in the past, we always talk about and like Olympia and Tumwater, they decided to have the hearing examiner decision be final and appealable to Superior Court as well. They've made those decisions over the last 10 years, I believe. and Yelm. And so there is some, examples out there of other decisions in other communities, and then land use is always a local issue, but it's a local issue everywhere. And so these issues aren't unique. They're always there and always been around. And in my 20, 30 years of working, it's something it's this there. So this kind of gets back to some of the options that the council can consider in their role in the quasi judicial process. Item number one, no change. That would be option A on the legislative authority, but basically retain city council as final decision on certain land use applications. That still keeps the council involved and subject to those appearance of fairness rules. So you can't have any ex parte communications. You can't get information. You can't provide information. Also with that, if there's an issues out there, you can't act on it until that land use matter is completed. And other applications may come in that time because there's a long period of time. So there may be another application that could have been addressed if you weren't involved. Item two, we're putting all options out there. We can go back in time and go to the Board of Adjustment, but then you're having to appoint citizens and verify that they have the ability, and then that decision is going to be final and go right to Superior Court, and then you might have a whole different type of dialogue in that land use permitting process. Item three, with the examiner with local appeal. I thought we updated that. The hearing examiner with a local appeal option. Again, that amends the process, have the hearing examiner as a final decision. And all quasi-judicial matters subject to appeal to council. But again, that still keeps council involved in that process. You're still subject to the appearance of fairness and those ex parte communication rules, and you can't address issues as they come up. You have to wait until a process is completed. And then finally, option four, which hearing examiner with is a final decision. And so in that, the hearing examiner's final decision on all quasi judicial matters subject to appeal to Superior Court, and that takes council out of that process. But again, council can have a different dialogue with the public, as well as staff could have that different dialogue, both with council and the public too.
Each one of these options could be its own work session.
Well, it could, but it also it is fairly and straightforward. It's one of those things where council's got to decide what role do you want to play in that, and what role do you want to, how do you want to be engaged? Because a lot of the predominant message I hear from the public is that frustration of not being able to talk to their elected officials, and there's a lot, and that's understandable. If you're not involved in those processes and understand them, they don't understand that you're actually in a judicial role, not in a council role. And so when you're limited to your opportunity to ask questions, your opportunity to have dialogue with people, to take testimony directly, and you have to look at that record, and you're limited to what you have little discretion within that record. You have to have a
Hey, Rick.
Yes.
You made a good point right there, because when they look at us, they look at a representative that they elected to represent them. And it's not like you can see the, us taking off our council hat and putting on a black robe to be go in the judicial system, or lack of better reference, terms. But me personally, I don't think I can support anything that I can't, as a representative, talk to the people that elected me to represent them. That's just, it's, I'd rather have no control and be able to talk to my constituents that I'm elected by than not.
Yeah, that really is, kind of the decision before council. It's not really a work session on each topic. That is the core decision. How do you want to engage your constituents? How do you want to be able to interact with them? And if you're in a position, like I said, all those reasons, you're very limited in discretion, you can't have any communication, and they're expecting you to do something, but you have to, bounded by law and case law, or be subject to appeal and those liability issues. That's a difficult position to be in. And again,
Lose.
yeah, again, and relating it back to those issues, and you can't work on those legislative things that you can get started on early to prevent the next application to come in.
So I had a question, as you bring up application, and earlier you said that once an application is received in that, I can't remember the exact word you guys used, but it basically, it means that no law can be changed.
The application is vested.
It's vested.
So that means the laws that are in place, the regulations that are in place at the time the application was submitted and determined to be complete. The laws that are in place at that time are the laws that control the processing of that application.
And I
So
totally
nothing-
understand.
Yeah,
I
nothing.
totally understand that. I work in an industry where once I have an application, we call it triggered.
Yep.
You know, and there's components to an application that will determine whether you have a full application that can be triggered where nothing else can be changed. Or vested in this case. So my question is what determines an application?
Well, the determination of application is if all the materials that are subject for that review are submitted. So you have your application form, you have any special reports like tree reports, wetland reports, shoreline assessments. If it needs a traffic impact analysis, that's submitted. So you have a complete package that can be reviewed, adequately reviewed by city staff. And the city staff says this application is complete. That application and issues that notice of application, that's the vesting date. That's when it becomes vested.
Okay, so a complete application could be different for this parcel than it would be for that parcel.
Right, because we have our standard requirements that are in our ordinances and what constitutes a complete application. But in there's caveats that say, plus any other studies that are applicable to the particular property or the project.
Right.
And so we can, at the pre-sub level, say, we also need these type of information.
Right,
and
there's
analysis.
overlays or conditions.
Right,
Like if something's near a shoreline, we might need a different set of reports or studies before it's ready.
or the traffic analysis, and we want to have make sure we have the analysis for, pedestrian and bicycle pieces, and it didn't have it in the initial submittal.
And I know this is a work session. We don't usually take action, but I think this is important enough because someone could drop application tomorrow and then here we go again, a third time, I think the only two options really are 2 or 4, or we do some kind of moratorium to prevent this from happening a third time. We knew about it with the gas station, and now it happened with Hicks Lake. And it's going to happen again if we don't do something. That is my concern.
Let's go to the next slide. I want to talk about steps because it's not as simple. There's going to need some work to be done because if council gives us direction, you want to look at it.
Hey, Rick, can we do a simple moratorium to pause everything?
Moratorium, it can be a tool, but a moratorium has a couple. You have to determine that there's an emergency to the public safety and welfare. You have to see that it's there for 6 months. And also it gives a message, in this case, would stop all applications for quasi-judicial. So that could also, you could also see potential projects not moving at all in terms. But, with procedural steps, if council does consider a change, we'll need to amend chapter 2.32, which is the land use hearings code. We also will need to go through and verify all sections of other sections of the LMC that refer back.
But can I, one more question? What if we took the permitted uses right now and restricted the ones that are the most sensitive to the public, like gas stations and convenience stores and stuff like that, until we could have the full review? So at least we stop the serial bleeding.
I think that might be a particular, that type of use for neighborhood commercial would be our next agenda item. We can talk about that a little bit. But also too, again, and you talk about, and you're suggesting or asking about a moratorium, there are definite procedural steps you have to take in order to do that. And that's something that you have to be able to demonstrate the public need and an emergency situation.
And all of the steps that are outlined here on this slide are steps that staff is going to do to prepare council to make a decision. That's not anything that council needs. This is just what would happen if council directs us to do something. What's needed, if there's going to be direction from council, it's going to be whether council wants a hearings examiner's decision to be final, appealable to Superior Court, or whether council wants to remain in the quasi-judicial process having final review authority and receive recommendations from the hearing examiner, which are going to keep the status quo, which would prevent council from communicating with constituents that have concerns. Whereas if you directed city staff to look towards hearing examiners' decisions being final, we would do all the work to see what needs to be amended, and then we would present council with an ordinance of what that would look like. And council, of course, is going to have an opportunity to fully review that before council would take any action on that.
Well, let's finish hearing what Rick has to say. I know we're not here to take action or make a decision, but we definitely are here to absorb the information and see if we, bring this to the full council.
So we would go through and, identify all the provisions in our codes and regulations that address the hearing examiner process, the judicial process, and propose amendments based on the council's direction. We'd schedule the matter for a council meeting at the appropriate time and do the work. And at that council meeting, the council could take any testimony, public comment and all that type of stuff on the matter, and then make that decision. If the council does make a decision to amend those ordinances, then we'd also have to go back and then start amending the contract with the hearing examiner. And there might be opportunity to have a review of the hearing examiner and services as well. And there was a little typo that says public hearing. I should say public hearing. I thought I made that change and didn't say it. So, but really it goes to a council meeting, to a public process, and the community will also have the opportunity to address the council too.
Part of our open public meetings.
Yeah, it would put it.
That we need to provide notice if we're going to make a decision like this, so
Right.
people can show up and weigh in.
I didn't want to make it sound like a hearing because it's not.
Yeah,
I-
but what we have on the agenda today is discussion.
Right.
That would be a notice that we may be taking an action, a decision on
Yep.
changing the process.
And the public can come and attend, observe, and if address council.
Well, let me, maybe just to clarify, you're right. I think we would like to get some feedback and direction. I think based on our recent experience, I think what Rick has presented tonight, what we've talked about, if you stay in your current status, you are in a constrained, limited decision-making capacity, which it seems, I think from the outside and even the inside, there's limited benefit. If you're out of that process, you do have the ability to directly discuss with the residents and constituents and voters. And then you're actually able to respond to the policy making. And I guess this is more of a question is, what do your role want to be? That your proper role should be making the policy, making sure the standards are set for the community. And then there's a process for that to go. This would be parallel to building a home. You don't make the decision when a home is built. You've adopted the International Building Code, you put the zoning in place, you made sure the setbacks are correct, you made sure whatever requirements for that home to be built, and then it's left up to the building department with professionals to make sure those are executed. It's very similar to that process. We really should take you out of that land use process and put you back in the policy making.
Do you want me to go first?
Hold on one second. As we get into discussion on this agenda item, and Mike, you'll be going first. First of all, we do have some members of the public here. And as a council, I just wanted to give you guys the opportunity to, we need to weigh in as to whether we're going to, I know the public wants to say stuff. Okay. And if it's all right with you guys, then we can engage. And I just need to make sure that everybody here is okay with that prior to moving on into this discussion. So all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, are there any opposed? Okay, then we will engage. And I just want to, for the public, I just understand that this is a work session, not a public forum. So we won't be doing, a whole lot of, robust conversation, but we'll want to hear what you have to say. If you have some questions, we'll probably have, keep you limited to a minute or two. But we don't want to leave here without you guys having a chance to ask questions about what you've seen tonight. And so with that, Councilmember Stedman, please.
All right. I said it before. I think I can only support options 2 or 4, and that's the Board of Adjustment or the examiner with the LUPA appeal. And the reasons why, there's 2. The first one is appearance of fairness. You don't even have to be unfair. You just have to appear that you're unfair. That is language hugely against anything remotely positive to anybody in a decision-making process, much like this process. So that's the first one. The other one is, I lost my train of thought, but that's the biggest one. Anything quad judicial, you know, when people have trouble spelling it, they're probably gonna have trouble understanding it. So those are my concerns. I'm leaning towards Board of Adjustment or the examiner by Lupa, and that's just me. So I'm done.
Okay, so as we move forward, just remember, we're not here to take action, but to absorb information and consider future action. And that is the real intent of this work session. That's why all these people have put all this information together. So just want to make sure that we're clear on that before we move forward. Councilmember Vasquez.
I can move so they can stand here, so they can be seen. Oh.
Come on down. So as we move into discussion, you know, if you do have a comment or question and you would like to take that position, again, we're not here to make any kind of policy decisions. This is just an information gathering session, a work session. And so if you would like to say something, then please state your name and your city of residence, and try to keep your question or comment to a minute or two.
Absolutely.
I just have a couple. My name's Janet. My question is for you, Rick Walk. You said, and I'm just going to paraphrase it, you said it's up to us to find out the information on properties, on parcels, that you're open to giving information on these parcels. And this is during the public policy stage. I'm assuming that we can go get information on parcels. How are we to know that those parcels are going to be in question? And because I feel like when the first notice goes up, the notice of land use action, and then is that in the policy stage still, or is that in the implementation stage when it gets to that point?
That point is in the implementation of the quasi-judicial stage. And what I was referring to about information for properties around, so there is if there's no action proposed on the property, then there's not really anything for we to do to notify what properties could be. What I was referring to is before any land use action, just in your neighborhoods or environment, you see vacant properties, you have any curiosity what that could happen, what that person could do with that. We have that information of zoning, we have the instrument comp plan designation, development codes that we can inform people if they knew to look for it. But that's the other thing, is trying to get the public to know that we are a resource and anticipate. Because a lot of times it's not, this is
What ability do we have to impact that? So say, for instance, I saw this parcel on Hicks Lake Road, and I saw it, say, 10 years ago. And I wanted to know, hey, what's going on with that? I should have come to you then and found out that it was zoned high density, and what could I have done about it then?
well, if that conversation had occurred, then there's a couple of things that could have happened. One is, do you acquire the property, you protect it or preserve it, or approach the city and say, what can we do to change the rules? So if we don't like something that could potentially go there, what are other options, and what are processes to change what's allowed? And that's where we would talk to you about comprehensive planning in the process, the cycle and timing of that, how to get engaged and start that conversation. So those are the kind of two options. The challenge is there's a lot of people in the community that aren't aware of those potentials or those resources to seek, and trying to figure out how we get people to be aware and understand. Because ultimately, we do these large outreach efforts, we do these comprehensive plan, 2015, we had the Envision Lacey program. We got quite a bit of turnout, but we were going to places where people were. But that would have been a good opportunity to look at that. But again, how do we get people to understand that that is a resource and ability to do that? A lot of people, when they buy that property, don't necessarily come to us and say, hey, I'm looking at buying a single family home. What's the zoning, what's allowed? So trying to figure out how we get people to be better informed and opportunity that the city is the most approachable local government or government agency there is. And we're here to help and serve the public and get information to it if we know how to get there or how people know how to seek it.
So before we move too much further, I wanted to just reiterate so if you do have a question or you want to make a comment, come to this seat over here and then you can speak to the entire table from that position.
I didn't know I was.
Yeah, I think basically what we're all concerned about is signs went up and by that time it was too late. And the developers, they're investing millions of dollars before we were involved. So it's really hard to say no to them. It's a tough situation. And you council members, I really feel for you guys. I know you feel like you just don't have any say so whatsoever. And we feel the same way about you. We just feel like we don't have any say so whatsoever either. It's just all, it seemed like it was just a checkbox there on, we contacted the public. Okay, good, we're done. And yeah, I really feel for you guys. It's a tough decision for one or three also.
But going back to what Rick said earlier, and this is where we do need the engagement of the community and have them have an understanding what their surroundings are. You know, we do a cycle for our comprehensive land use update every 10 years. That is the time to say, you know what? This is what we think the future of the city is. And yes, it looks like a treat parcel and maybe people make assumptions it's going to be a park forever, but there's an underlying zoning. The map has always been in place. And so if that's residential, then it's going to be residential. And unfortunately, I think what happens is people don't get engaged until something does happen outside of their fence or whatever. And then by that time it is too late. You have limited opportunity, but we have staff living in the community. We have great professionals. We're trying to uphold the community standard for the city of Lacey. I mean, we're all on the same side. We're trying to make this the best possible place to live in. But really the best time to guide that future is at the zoning level, at the standards and guidelines. And that's how you ensure this is what you want your city to become. And quite frankly, in defense of a private property owner, they're doing what they thought they could be allowed to do. So I mean, it's just like playing a game of Monopoly. Here are the rules. We can't change the rules midstream. I think that's the rub.
And
Hey, Scott, I live on Hicks Lake and I know about this process, and never in a single time has it ever occurred to me that someone might build a couple hundred apartments on Hicks Lake, and I know this inside and out. So, I mean, it's tough. Even when you know, do you really know? You can't anticipate what's going to happen in the future. It's just a map. You know what I mean?
But quite frankly, we all own this, and I own it as a staff member. Council owns it. It's the community's code too. That zoning has been in place since the 90s. I mean, it's always been high density. And then when we talk globally about, hey, what do we need to do for housing? We need affordable housing within our community. That stuff has all been set in place, and really that discussions does need to start at the beginning before development takes place. So that.
And that's in that 10-year cycle that Scott mentioned is that we did the big push promotion, try to get people, but also if people, had indication of it, they could approach, there's an annual comp plan process too that will be engaged as well. So
for those of you, everybody who, the city is a great resource. You're welcome to come to the counter and you can find out from there. But even easier than that is the Thurston County Geodata parcel search resource. And I use it on a daily basis because in my industry, I have to. But there's so much information on Thurston County Geodata. You can look at it as a map, or you can look at just individual parcels. All you have to do is type in an address and it'll tell you exactly who owns it, where they live, or where they get their mail, what it's zoned, how long it's been that way, who's the commissioner of that area. So much information is there. And if you are concerned about a parcel, that would be a great place to start, because with that information, you could bring that to the city counter. You could talk to Rick or Ryan or Grant or somebody about, your concerns and because of what you found out.
Yeah, geodata.org, it's a really good resource. I go on there daily as well. But like what the deputy mayor said, there's a plethora of information. You can figure out zoning, you can figure out just about everything you want to know, wetlands, all kinds of stuff.
Tons.
It's a very, very useful website.
Well, when people move, we used to say, hey, look at the school district, look at the business community, all that is a, value of your community. Now I tell people, look what you're zoned at. And then think about, find out what's permittable there and what's not. If you're, because people don't know. So I've just added that to, don't just check the schools and that stuff, do go above and beyond.
Because part of our thing that we have to do is, respect what the parcel, the property owner can do, not what we just hope they will or won't do. What can they do with that parcel? Is it legal? And then we put them through the ringer to make sure that everything that they do in preparing to do this action falls in line with our code, rules, guidelines, Department of Ecology, all that list of people who all have a hand in whether they can do what they're hoping to do or not. And, I was thinking about earlier this week, I was thinking about Hicks Lake, and, that parcel took 30 years to develop, somewhere in that ballpark, because the effort, it wasn't just a single effort, it was multiple efforts over several decades. And so part of me was happy that, that community got to enjoy that parcel for such a long period of time. And the other part was like, this guy finally got to develop his parcel in the way that he wanted to. It's almost a double-edged sword. It was so
Sweet.
It was. So anyway, state your name, where your city of residence, and try to keep it to a minute or two.
My name is Aaron Clay, city of residence is Lacey. I live near Hicks Lake as well. I just don't really have a question. I just, I just wanted to say that there's an inherent imbalance in that we as citizens have to, do this extra effort to engage in the process when, we have our own, increasingly busy lives. And, there's a lot of the taxing, things that they're taking up part of, our free time and our lives. We're having to work harder for less, all that good stuff. But on the other hand, the developers are able to spend, years and lots of money. They're able to carefully craft their plan. And the way the process is constructed, we have, maybe a month to go, oh, they're doing something. Oh, we gotta, do what we can to throw together some kind of plan to use the process to figure out, okay, what part of the process can we go, oh, they're not doing this appropriately. So we can go, okay, well, maybe there's a flaw here. We can do something about this within the rules of the system. And I just feel like, we're all to a certain extent guilty of trusting the process, that the process will do the job and it will go through, us as citizens, we just have to kind of hope that things will, we can trust everyone to, do what's in our best interest. And, even as I just, learned today that even as city council members, there's still a process that you become involved in when you achieve the elected position. There's still you're not necessarily in a full leadership role. You're just a part of the process. So, and I just, that was a really enlightening experience to learn that information. And that's all I say.
And what did you say your first name was?
Aaron Clay, Aaron.
Aaron. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. But I definitely appreciate the things that you said. And I also want you to know that every one of these council members has a day job too.
Yeah.
HR director, real estate agent, loan officer,
Yeah.
and so on.
It takes away from your ability also to learn about all this stuff and to carefully examine all of these, all these plans and everything. There's a limited time for you guys to learn all that stuff too, to absorb all this information here too. So yeah, all of our time.
And we also live in your community. We're your neighbors and we're affected by everything that happens as well. I feel for you because, I don't know what else to say,
Legally, we have to live.
For your job now that we've attended this, for sure.
Legally, we have to live in the city limits, so we live here too.
Or not.
Primary.
That is a requirement.
That is a requirement. Thank you, Aaron.
My name is Dana Clay and I sent a letter to everyone and I just have a point of confusion, I think. You said that the hearing examiner, the option for Lacey is that the hearing examiner makes a recommendation, but it's not final. My confusion comes in where I think I stated it in the letter that I sent to everyone, that I don't see it codified, that the density must be whatever the developer asks for, that it must be 35, 50 units per acre or whatever, that you might have the discretion within the law, within your decision-making ability after the recommendation to say, you know what, this is a dead-end street. The infrastructure doesn't really support 310 units. Let's do a lesser density than that. Let's bring that down to more like 20 units per acre or 15 or whatever might be more reasonable to that specific area, given that you are residents and you know that area. That's just my point of confusion. But I thought our sending in all of the information that we did and the pictures and it felt like for many of us, blood, sweat, and tears to put out testimony, to get up and speak, which is like my last, I hate it. It's like my number one fear. Of course, it's everybody's, but to feel like there's nothing you can do. You have no say. And the property that you've probably spent your lifetime paying off, now going to be worth a lot less. And you're going to be lucky to park in your own neighborhood. And we have a neighbor who recently bought a house and she wants to turn it into a, I know, but I mean, it means more cars. She wants to turn it into a home thing. Then she wants to buy, anyway, so it means more cars. And it's like, how do I do? Yeah, we're just, I'm sorry. Anyway, my confusion is that if it's a recommendation, it feels like you had the power to do something. I mean, I appreciate you immensely. I know you work 2 jobs and I very much appreciate all of you and that you're listening right now, but I'm just frustrated.
Well, and probably Rick could be more eloquent than I can, but I think I mentioned what council is. To some degree, again, they're in a very limited capacity to make a decision. Yes, it's a recommendation, but then council's tasked to be within that narrow scope to make sure that the community standards were met and those issues you just brought up were mitigated adequately. And I don't know if you take solace, but I mean, we do have professionals on city staff working on your behalf of the community to ensure that if there are environmental impacts, traffic impacts, that we are doing our due diligence to make sure that those can be mitigated and that the quality of life is not substantially impacted by that. And so that's where your testimony is important, but just know that traffic engineers did look at those issues. They looked at traffic bombs. They did do a traffic analysis. They looked at the infrastructure necessary to make sure that's still walkable and that access. And so they're looking at all those things. And again, this goes back to, and your testimony is relevant where if like, Luke, you missed this and you need to take a look at this. And I guess that's part of the process too. So that's where your testimony is important. And Rick gave that example about someone didn't know about a specific stormwater issue and that was made apparent. So when your testimony is given, all those items were addressed by either planning or public works or transportation or other consultants looking at the environmental impacts.
So if down the road, what we fear will happen happens. Do we have any? I guess that's just the way it
Is your, it sounds like your primary concern is that your value is gonna go down after this.
Well, and the quality of life in the area, just the masses of people trying to get down one exit in the whole street because it's a one-way street, it's dead end. And 600 people or however many trying to go to work in the morning, traffic getting down, trying to go one way out. That's it. And then I know we've sent pictures of what it looks like in the summertime when people come to Wanchers. You can't get down the street. If you got people parking in front of Wanchers and we have a person in a wheelchair, he's always riding down there. And we have a lady in a walker. And people are walking literally in the middle of the street because there's not enough space. When the cars park and the cars drive and that's now. So that's my concern is that if they really didn't think about that and they're not going to pave all the way down to 22nd and really take care of that in advance, my fear is that, some of the kids walking to school, because they come out of the apartments, their ingress and egress for those apartments isn't necessarily on Hicks Lake, it's on Ruddle for the most part, but a lot of them do kind of speed down that road now, especially that end Forest Grove. But my fear is that somebody's going to be killed with all those cars coming out of that volume of apartments. It's just one-way street, it's dead-end street. I think I've harped enough, but anyway.
And what was your name again?
Dana Clay.
Dana Clay.
Thank you, Dana.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I'm Jamie Schultz, and I moved from the west side of Olympia to Lacey going on 8 years ago. I was never involved in a city process, so I guess I had my head in the sand. So what I'd like to communicate is just kind of what I've learned in the last couple. And yes, I'm that person that complains to the staff about Shady Lane, no sidewalks. The children, I'm sorry, they're like, oh, she's the one who calls me.
We know Shady Lane.
Yeah.
I know, you must. Because those kids are in the no walk zone, they're supposed to walk to school. You can't walk to school in Shady Lane or you die. And I'm right at the curve, by the way, and unless you know that curve, you don't know Shady Lane. So I've even asked if the sidewalk could just go around the corner, and I can't even get back from the city of Lacey. But anyway, that's not really why I wanted to talk tonight. That's just been my experience with working with the city of Lacey. It's been very frustrating so far, because I don't think like the residents of Shady Lane are asking for very much. And they're asking them for a very good reason, and there's nothing from the city of Lacey. But when it comes to this process, and so my house is on Hicks Lake, and so with this process, I've gotten to know, and I appreciate tonight, but I wanted to be here because what frustrated me the most, other than the development that we're going to have to put up with that we're afraid is going to ruin our lake, is when I found out what the process was. I was like shocked because, that landowner had the right to sell it according to the zoner. The developers have the right to develop according to whatever they want to do to make as much money as they can. The process, the examiner, he's looking at all the things that you talked about tonight, codes, regs, all that stuff. But my thing is, who is representing living in Lacey? Who is taking care of us? And that's what I thought you guys did. And that's when I voted for you. That's what I thought you guys did. And then when we couldn't talk to you, I was like, what?
Yeah.
So who is helping us? Who is saying, this is what we want Lacey to be? And this is our comments, and we're the council, and this is, you know, well, whatever, you know what I'm saying? So that was my big shock in this whole process. Besides, again, just the frustration that's already been communicated, because it, besides what it's going to do to the lake, besides what it's going to do to our quality of life on the lake, the surrounding area, it's just going to be difficult. And in the process, I didn't see, and I might have missed something, I didn't see any improvement to help with, you know, the more development. But we see that a lot in the building of cities, is that it comes so much later. Meanwhile, you know, there's so many traffic concerns and so many, you know, roads and all that kind of stuff. So thank you for looking at the process. I heard that you actually did it. I didn't know if you did. So I'm glad to know that, and I hope you'll look at the process, because again, I don't see that the citizens have enough of a voice in the process. Thank you.
And your name again?
Jamie Schultz.
Jamie Schultz.
Mhm.
Thank you, Jamie.
Hi, I'm Susan Cooksey. And many of you have had my emails on different subjects that you're on Hicks Lake and my feelings. But I really do appreciate this hearing tonight and listening to you and listening to your responses. And the frustration as I'm sitting there, knowing that it was too late once that application was in, no matter what. And I want to reiterate what everyone else has said. We want to be able to talk to you. So if there's any kind of way that you can structure so that happens, it would be appreciated. We want you to represent us. Whether you can do anything at that point, once the application is in, I don't know. I was the one that sent the email about the ex parte quasi judicial process. And in reading your municipal code and everything else I was reading, it appeared to me that, yes, the hearing examiner's decision was final. In a way it is, because, you know, you're not going to vary from that. You're not going to change it.
The discussion we have to change it is very narrow.
Very, very little. So it's
Yeah.
pretty much it's set in stone. But as I started reading the different municipal codes of hearing examiners in some of the other cities, and then got overwhelmed and did something else. I did notice there was differences in how they were handled. Like the one city, and then I went back to see if I could find it, and I couldn't, that had in their example that, or in their municipal code, that they required the hearing examiners to do a site review. But then there was another paragraph underneath it that says, but if you can't, it's okay. I mean, the way it was worded, but I would like to be able to see the hearing examiner or anyone else actually do a walkthrough and a site review, walk from that dead end street, you know, walk through the woods and the forest. And maybe they'd see some other things that needed to be discussed. I worked for a builder and a developer, so I know their side of it. But I also know my side of it as a resident. And so their reports, their mitigation studies are going to favor them. They'll do it, but it's going to favor them. And I'm really afraid that that sidewalk, as I watched the engineering company do the work on the street and doing the site plan, looking at how to widen that street for the walkway, and going 20 feet, actually about 10 feet into the Watchers Park area, which with all the trees that we're going to be able to stay there, that won't be when you have to widen the road and put the sidewalk. And I just hope that you as a city have looked at, when that's done, if the price is on your shoulders or on the city of Lacey's shoulders, it's gonna be expensive. My niece works in King County and does budgeting for that kind of thing. And she told us that sidewalk and that road is going to be very expensive. So if the developer isn't paying for it, basically we are. So I want those kind of things looked at. And also, when you're doing the review on the hearing examiners, can you add like site reviews? Can you add to whatever their responsibilities are, even if they end up being the final say? You want to say something?
Yeah, that's okay. Please. Oh, and first, Susan, thank you. I read through your information, and you came across quite a few good RCWs and assessment. And there's some other things too, of course, as you can tell from my presentation, there's all these different. So anytime you would like me, to talk with me, or I can kind of help provide some more information to you, I'd be happy to do so. And then also, your question about site visits by the hearing examiner, those type of things. If that's one thing that through this process, we were going to need to update the contract for hearing examiner services. And those are things that it's good to hear that we can suggest, and councils I know is listening to, that we can put those type of provisions in the contract, if not in the ordinance too. So one of the challenges that we had over the last couple of years, and this is created a little bit different environment, is with the pandemic and Zoom meetings and stuff and things like that. And that changed some of the traditional protocol, but we can go back and revisit those.
And just one final thing. I moved here about, I guess, 4 or 5 years ago from Redmond. I sold my house there and moved here. I lived there 25 years. Grew up in Seattle. So I've watched the development in Redmond and Kirkland, Kenmore, Bothell, and seen some of the really fantastic development that they have for multifamily, with multifamily above, retail below, it's cohesive in the city. And I would just, if you haven't taken a trip up there, and I wouldn't do it during traffic times.
Which is more predictable anymore, so.
Yeah, but I hate it. I'm glad I don't have to do it very often. But just driving around and seeing what they've done, especially when we were in Bothell, I think it was, Kenmore, what they've done really kind of brought that little city together. And the last thing I want to see happen is Martin Way look like Aurora Avenue. And I worry about that when I got to go down Aurora Avenue for whatever reason anymore. And I see the strip joints, and I see the pot shots, and I stops, and I see all the little things down that street. I don't want that to happen on Martin Way.
Can I also put another plug, because there's a lot of history of the Martin Way corridor, and right now we are doing a Martin Way corridor study, and it's 3/4 through the process, but it's now developed the preferred alternatives for that corridor, and it'd be a really good time to get engaged. And so if I can get your information, we can make sure you get concluded in the contact list for when that stuff is released and you get some more public input, because we are looking at it as a corridor from Olympia through the county portion and into East Lacey, and looking at some of the land use designations and some improvements along there. And you refer to Aurora, and Aurora's been going through a transformation as well, especially in the shoreline and Edmonds portions of it. And that's some of the things that's been talked about in this process here. So if there's any questions about how to get involved with that, please let me know, and I'll make sure you get engaged. And
send you an email with my contact information specific.
Perfect. And you said your name was?
Susan Cooksey.
Susan.
And keep in mind, there's 3 different jurisdictions in that stretch.
Oh, I
much like
know.
north.
And I listened to one planning meeting on Zoom that discussed what was going on.
Yeah, the planning commission meeting, we had a presentation.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I understand that would be a challenge, because you can go one block and you're Olympia and the next block is Lacey. So.
Yep. This is exactly what it is. So thank you so much for coming and having comment. Went to school in Bellevue. worked in Kirkland, spent a lot of time in Redmond, also from Seattle.
You know all those things.
Yes, all those different places that you talk about, the process that Redmond went through, where, you know, just down by Marymore, and there's all kinds of retail with, you know, housing above, you know, so did a really, Redmond Town Center. There's plenty of examples for us to look at,
I
and
don't
we,
even recognize it anymore, but when I first moved in.
actually send staff to go and look, and, well, they send themselves, but.
When will the video be up? I mean, or this meeting's video? Will all the attachments be there, the slides?
Yes,
Everything that you saw.
I can send out the slide presentation to all of you, if I get your contact information as well.
So- I was gonna say, it'll be on YouTube.
Yeah.
This is being recorded right now, so as soon as this meeting concludes, you'll be able to have access to it.
Okay, it won't be on the website?
So that you can access it through the website too, right? Within. I'll have Shannon speak to the truth here.
So the recording will be available on the website under work sessions, but it'll also be available on YouTube, and you can access it right now, and you can access it anytime after this meeting on both of those locations.
Yeah, the slides are very valuable, and I want to be able to go back through them.
And we can also send them to you directly as well, so, okay, and, you know.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much,
So
all of
actually,
you. Thank you
I'll
for
just
all
leave
your
my-
hard work.
Thank you for addressing the council.
I'll
And,
leave the cards at the table.
One person online.
Thank you.
for allowing us to.
Yes.
Yeah, not a problem. If you guys want to stick around, there's actually one more person who is online who would like to address this work session. So if you wouldn't mind bringing that person in. Is it John who's?
Believe so.
Yeah, he should be on, the person is in the Zoom, they need to unmute their mic.
Okay. Give him a couple minutes, a minute.
Hello,
There you go.
Hello, you are on.
thank you. My name is Janet O'Halloran. I live in Lacey, and I have a few questions regarding the process of the Meridian Market. I have some suggestions as you consider changes to this process, and I have a few questions I hope to get some clarity on. First, I'd really like to compliment Samra, because throughout the entire process where I was asking her questions and doing extensive research, she was exceptional. And I assume that she's a representative of the entire planning department, but she was my primary point of contact. I think she merits a special attention and commendation for her professionalism and her thoroughness in answering my questions. Secondly, I never understood, and because I joined this particular meeting 15 minutes late, I haven't heard a lot of conversation yet about changes, not just to whether or not the quasi judicial process stays in effect, but if the conditional use language needs to be modified. I do recall just one slide, but I didn't attend to it fully, Mr. Wall, but I will go back and look at that about if that particular language needs to be addressed, because that seemed to be the critical point for us out here who were objecting to the gas station element of the Meridian Market. And it was that language that prompted this mysterious footnote 3 on page 21 of the hearing examiner's report. I still have not heard any council member or city staff or city attorney, and I see you all there, address why that didn't give someone the confidence to at least ask Mr. Snyder to draft some language in a letter of response to deny this, or to ask for further change or something, because it did very specifically, say that local economic demand and citizen support, all those elements needed to be there. It was just a measure of it's just a matter of how to measure citizen support. So I'm hoping that tonight somebody could please address footnote 3, page 21, because he gave that potential, and I just didn't hear anybody respond to the potential. I also want to ask Mr. Wall, tonight you said that there was this list of different entities that reviewed the process at a certain stage, and some of them were certain, like a mandatory font color on your slide, and others were in black. As I understood it, with the Lacey Meridian Market thing, Northeastern School District was contacted only because Samra thought it might be helpful to have contacted them. It was not mandated. And because this market, which has now been approved, and the gas station, which has now been approved, has the potential to sell alcohol if the state of Washington gives them a liquor license, the proximity to the land owned by Northeastern School District that has the potential to be an elementary school, there's going to be a real conflict there. So maybe even in the developer's best interest, it's helpful, you know, that be looked at early on before something happens. And then it's a big thing about selling alcohol within that. I think it's, don't quote me on the distance, but it seems like the school district parking lot will be within that problematic area for an alcohol license. Secondly, Parks Department policy. I know that Parks was notified, Parks didn't respond, but the park directly across the street, it strikes me that in their policy language, this could be something that mitigates this in the future, because there are a few other neighborhood commercial zones out here that I fear are going to be developed into gas stations or something of that nature. Why I don't think that Parks goes out and buys parcels for future development, says, let's make sure they're next to gas stations. And I'm one of those citizens that went out and visited every single Lacey park, developed or not. And with the exception of Brooks, there was no gas station nearby. So I'm wondering what, you know, if Parks Department could be brought into this to say, for future development, we don't want to secure land and ask for taxpayers to support, you know, election money-making types of levies or bonds or whatever it might be to develop parks when the potential for a gas station across the street is there. I also hope that in whatever you do, that it's possible to expand the 300 feet of notification. You know, 300 feet isn't a lot. And you could see by the number of people that participated in the process out here in Northeast Lacey that many of us live beyond that, but I just think a matter of practicality in that. Another thing, the honesty of the applications packet, there's a lot of conversation about it. It has to be thorough. Check box this is in, check box that's in. Who's evaluating the integrity of what is being expressed in that packet? Because in my mind, the geotechnical report that was used for that particular gas station was for a daycare center. It was not for a gas station with 57,000 gallons of, you know, gas and underground storage tanks, where the geotechnical report clearly stipulated that there was perched groundwater in several sites out there. What I heard from city staff was that'll be caught later in the process. It seems to me that at the beginning of the process, we all operate with integrity, and that should have been a point to stop and say, go get a new report right now. We don't know what we're going to find out there if we know there's perched groundwater in an area where those tanks are going to be located. That really concerned me. And I also wonder about just the integrity of that packet, the developer's packet, in what they represent. If they're saying they're building a metropolitan market like the one in Tacoma, what part of this process is holding this to a metropolitan market like the one in Tacoma? Because my guess is what we've just, you know, what we're going to be enduring out here is a fast food mini mart. Very much concerns me. And also when the developer says that they're local citizens, but they're not, and that's a proven fact, there are 3 strikes in my mind against that part of the packet being accurate. So just want to make sure if somebody addresses footnote 3 for me, somebody maybe, commits to making sure that if school district property undeveloped is in the proximity of that area, that they're mandatorily brought in. It's not an arbitrary thing. And parks policy change to include looking at development of parks, purchase of land in areas where there's neighborhood commercial zones and things like gas stations can come into it. I mean, we're going to have the notoriety of being the only one in town other than Brooks that has that thing going on. And then most importantly, the integrity of the packet. Plus, I also just want to say, I support the woman who suggested that people make site visits. That is critical. And I appreciate, Malcolm, I've forgotten your last name. Is it Mr. Green? Miller, sorry, I apologize. But I so appreciate that even though you had to recuse yourself from the process, that you physically went out to the site. And I don't know what ultimately influenced you. But when you said you didn't think you could support it, my feeling was that you physically were on site and could see some of the challenges to that. So most importantly, I'd love to hear about the footnote 3, page 21. Thank you.
If I may, Deputy Mayor.
Please.
I lived out there. So, I mean, I saw it every single day, but I'm also a quasi developer. My family does commercial property and we develop probably every 10 years or so. And we would never develop something in an area that met so much resistance. So take into consideration developers that do that. If you're not wanted in that area and you still continue to do business there, that's saying something.
On your first note, Janet, the CUP and zoning, that's actually be the second agenda item tonight, is to talk about the neighborhood commercial designation and then the allowed uses. And so we're going to be starting an effort, I think, depending on council direction, to start a process to do that review. And through that process, we're going to be setting up some public forums in the neighborhoods, especially right around the neighborhood commercial designation, starting first in the Northeast area. So there'll be some opportunity for us to have a listening session and get some information and feedback about the type of designations, what's allowed with them, what those, and what things we should be considered in design. So we're going to be starting that process, depending on council discretion, but that's the next agenda item that we're going to be talking about tonight.
Thank
you. Then I got your note on a 300-foot notification, review that. We will take a look at that. And that's something that also council could consider. And on footnote 3, that's something I'm going to probably defer somebody else because I wasn't involved in that end of the review and the hearing examiner's recommendation. So.
Well, and I'm certainly not prepared. I mean, this was a decision council made 2 months ago, I guess. I'd certainly be willing to follow up with Ms. Halverson, I believe it was, and to discuss that, but it would be inappropriate for me to offer any comment on that. I don't even have the record in front of me and I don't recall specifically the details of that.
We can arrange a time to meet and go over that provision of the
thank you. I would appreciate that. I'm just curious of the council members I see participating now. Do any of you remember seeing that footnote? I don't expect you to recall all the details about it, but do any of you remember seeing the footnote?
I can't say that I do.
I don't remember.
Okay. May I ask if all of footnote 3, page 21.
Is it?
If you're referring to a specific record.
You can't see your phone.
Maybe it's best if we continue this about this because of another item to go through.
Okay.
I understand that, but this is my opportunity to just ask the question, Mr. Snyder, if I may. When all of the 3 fairness of questions were asked of everybody, which I appreciate that. I know when a decision's made, at some point your bias becomes apparent because you're making a decision. So, that it's kind of a quandary of how do you define fairness and then make a decision. But I'm hopeful that if you don't adopt this process of getting rid of the responsibility for quasi-judicial, that a 4th question be added, even if it's not legally required, but just something the city of Lacey does. And that is that every council member make a site visit out there before making a decision. And that they also cite that they read every single page of the record. Because I don't see how anyone cannot remember footnote 3, page 21. That's all I'll say. Thank you.
Thank you for your for your comment.
She had one more question I wanted to respond to, and that was the school district and the alcohol sales. So anytime we're in proximity to a school district, we will send that notice to the school district for review and comments on land use applications. Related to alcohol, there's a separate process that goes through the Liquor and Cannabis Board, where they will actually, in reviewing and approving a permit to sell alcohol of any type for any type of location, they will send that notice to the city. We review it, 3 different aspects of it, from the police department, building, and city manager's office, and then they also send it to the school district as well. So there's a point where the school district can talk about, and the liquor control board would be the one to determine if they can sell alcohol that close to a school district through that comment period and process.
And ma'am, what was your name again?
My name is Janet, Janet O'Halloran, O''Halloran.
Okay, thank you for joining us tonight, and thank you for your comments.
You're welcome.
We will loop you in with Rick, and maybe he can answer any further questions that you might have.
Right, and it may be Mr. Snyder needs to be looped in on that as well, so he can have a chance to review the record and respond. Thank you.
We'll coordinate, yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so before we move on to our second agenda item, is there any staff who would like to comment before we move on?
I guess I would just like to have one more comment. Based on the discussion that I heard from council, we are going to prepare an amendment to the ordinance that would put you in option 4.
Yes.
Okay.
So is that?
We're making a decision.
No,
This is guidance. I'm just looking for.
Yeah, exploring it is, yeah.
So I think we want to move on to the
4, 2, and 4 is what I'd like.
for possible decision. And that brings us to our second agenda item, which is the audit current zoning within the city of Lacey agenda item. And again, that will be our director, Rick Walk.
And we'll wait for Ryan and Grant to come join me. And you can see up here. Thank you for your contact.
Brian, you patiently waited for 2 hours.
Grant, you got the presentation or?
What's those there?
Oh.
Go ahead and use the mouse to share screen, and it's the PDF that's down there.
No confidence in you.
Well, there's it to set up in the sake of time, and I'll be more brief than I planned to do. So, tonight, it's been a very significant issue for the community, especially out in the Northeast area for the Meridian Market and Fuel, that brought awareness to neighbor commercial designations and zoning allowances within close proximity, not only to neighborhoods, but schools and parks. And as we talked about the previous agenda item, once the application is vested, those laws are frozen. We can't do much. But now we have the opportunity to review that. I mean, it didn't affect that particular permit decision, but there's other neighbor commercial designations throughout the community. And it's an opportunity for us to take a deeper dive, to look at those and assess and see what's appropriate going forward. So with that, tonight we're going, Ryan and Hans is going to be going through a presentation that's going to be talking about the some of the comprehensive plan and policies that are associated, set up the neighborhood commercial zone, what the context and background is, the neighborhood commercial zoning classification, what's generally allowed, what's it, some of the design and development standards. Then we're going to take a little bit specific with the nuances of the Meridian Market and the history, real quick history of that zoning designation that occurred there, that comp plan designation occurred there. And then finally wrap up with looking, a quick overview of some of the sites that are currently designated commercial in the city, kind of their uniqueness. And then we'll wrap up with next steps in our strategy for going forward review if the council directs us to do so, and add this to the planning commission work program. So with that quick overview, I'll turn it over to Ryan.
So thanks, Rick. So with everything like this, you have to start at the beginning. So what we're going to do is go over kind of the timeline of neighborhood commercial in Lacey, talk about some of the zoning, talk about some of the comp plan policies, and then turn it over to Hans to talk through some of the the sites that are out there. So at the beginning, we've had neighborhood commercial in Lacey since 1980, so it's not a new zone by any means. In fact, it was back in 1980 when it was adopted, the only permitted uses, ironically enough, in neighborhood commercial were convenience stores and gas stations that sell food or drugs. And gasoline was allowed, but no more than 4 pumping nozzles. So I'm not exactly sure what was like property wise, what was zoned neighborhood commercial. Not, we haven't gone back and looked at that. But what I'm imagining is probably, for those who've been around long enough to remember, like the Ruddle Road General Store at Ruddle and Yelm Highway was probably one of the first neighborhood commercial sites we had in Lacey. There are some that are more kind of neighborhood. Harry's Market is one. Probably neighborhood commercial also would have been like the Interlake Grocery at Carpenter and Mullen. So think about what 1980 Lacey looked like. Those are probably some sites that would have been zoned neighborhood commercial. But as time went along, it became apparent that this was no longer serving neighborhood commercial in the truest sense, because it was really just kind of gas station convenience stores. So in 1995, a wholesale amendment was done to that zoning ordinance to implement the first Growth Management Act related plan. So that really established the list of permitted uses as we know it today, which there's a laundry list and I'll go through them. The dimensional requirements, things like setbacks and building heights and those kinds of things were established then, as well as design review was also an important part of that, looking at neighborhood compatibility, design of the buildings, those kinds of things too. We did have a minor amendment in 2004, which referred to other areas of our code for things like landscaping and off-street parking. Before that, we had kind of a mishmash in our zoning code where certain zones had their own parking standards or had their own landscaping standards, and we removed that from the individual zone and put in an overall landscaping and off-street parking code that covered all these uses. So it was a fairly minor amendment there. And then in 2011, the final ordinance provision that amended this was to integrate urban agriculture. So we went through a robust process in 2011 to add urban agriculture provisions to basically all zoning classifications in Lacey, and that was the last specific amendment to the zoning that was done. We did review in 2016 with our Envision Lacey outreach plan. We did review the zone for consistency with the comp plan and found that it was consistent, but there is some language that I'll talk about that's in our comp plan that suggests that maybe we should take a look at adjusting some of the permitted uses in the zone. So what is actually in the zoning code related to the site and building design standards? So first of all, looking at the intent of these is to provide small commercial uses in close proximity to residential areas for day-to-day needs. Really the purpose behind this is that so somebody can have their daily needs met without having to get in their car to do that, so that they've got goods and services, around the corner for them. So again, that neighborhood convenience commercial type use is really what kind of sticks out as far as, those daily uses. And it's reflected in the permitted uses, things like banks, convenience stores, daycares, restaurants, specifically restaurants without drive-throughs. I'll caveat that does not allow anything with a drive-through. Medical offices, coffee shops, post offices. There's a whole, like I said, a whole laundry list. And there's probably too many of them right now. And that's part of the issue is that, we have some of these categories of uses where things fit, including some
Video store.
very outdated, very outdated uses. Camera stores, photo shops, telecommuting services, which if you can explain what a telecommuting service is to me, I'm thinking it was maybe like an internet cafe. And video rental stores. So yeah, things that are getting a little long in the tooth, shall we say.
Bin code.
Yeah. And then conditional uses, and this is where the gas station is part of what you've all been talking about tonight is what is subject to a quasi judicial review that eventually requires a hearing examiner hearing and a city council final decision. There are 2 bars and cocktail lounges, which is its own category, and then gas stations. Those are what require the review ultimately by council. And then finally, there are residential uses permitted within neighborhood commercial, but they have to be above a retail use or commercial use. So they have to be a second story or above. Go ahead, Hans. The next section here talks about our development standards to make sure they are small scale and neighborhood focused. So things like our building heights are set at 35 feet. That's the same as single family residential. So you think about compatibility, a lot of that has to do with height and scale. 35 feet is the same as the neighboring low density residential zones. Maximum building size right now is limited to 40,000 square feet where you have multiple tenants. With a maximum tenant space of 10,000 square feet. So you can think about an individual building can be broken up. Basically a 40,000 square foot building is the biggest you could do with individual tenant spaces of 10,000 square feet. If you did your own standalone tenants or single tenant building, that's limited to 10,000 square feet.
Hey, Ryan, if I may,
Go ahead.
can you go back one slide? So I think the biggest heartburn with these two developments, or the one north of the freeway anyways, just as an example, would be convenience stores and gas stations and stuff like that. Why don't we just eliminate the heartburn issues like gas stations in that temporarily until we can have a full review of this commercial zoning that's neighborhood commercial? Just temporarily suspend or take them off as permitted uses until we can do the review. That way, if someone drops a permit tomorrow, those aren't permitted issues anymore, or permitted uses anymore, so they wouldn't be able to do it temporarily, not permanently, until we can review that. That's a happy medium where everybody wins, right?
So that is certainly an option that council could consider on specific uses if we go through a process. That would also have to wait to a council meeting and go through the appropriate steps for establishing it be a moratorium on specific use in neighborhood commercial. And then this is something that could be considered. One of the things we want to do if we go through this is get that listening session going with neighborhood groups out there around these designations and see what else there is. But that is something that could be an option if the council wanted to go that direction.
I mean, because literally we could permit tomorrow morning and build another gas station and we couldn't do anything about it, period. Well, we go through the process, but we know how that goes.
Go back to so go back one. We do, as I mentioned, also have, getting back to the standards, we do have, which are separate from the zoning, not in Title 16, but in our building and construction code in LMC 1423, we do have architectural design requirements that reflect neighborhood compatibility requirements as well. So just wanted to mention that. And then, like I mentioned before, we also have parking, landscaping, signage requirements. Projects are required to meet the public works development guidelines and public works standards, as well as our stormwater manual. So we could create a whole laundry list of various codes and regulations that that applies to this that's outside of the scope of the zoning. So I just wanted to mention those things because they do apply to projects, but yet they're outside of what you would see in, say, Title 16, which is our zoning code. So where do the neighborhood commercial sites come from? And in fact, what are the comp plan policies that guide us? So taking a step back from the permitted uses is the implementation part of the comprehensive plan, right? But we need to take a step back and look, where do these come from? Well, they come from the comp plan. In fact, we've got within our community vision chapter there a policy that speaks directly to neighborhood commercial sites to provide neighborhood commercial zones near residential areas to provide opportunities for neighborhood shopping and services with a focus on pedestrian accessibility. So that's right out of our comprehensive plan. If you want to go to the next slide, we generally have them as focus areas for commercial development. So it's not only includes neighborhood commercial sites, but places like our Lacey Midtown, Crossroads, Martin Way Corridor, the Lacey Gateway. they act as our commercial centers and nodes. And really, this is important because we did a retail market analysis in 2015 and looked at our retail market as a whole and looked at all these different sites around Lacey. And at that point, we integrated language directly into our comp plan that says in some areas, it may be appropriate to support a wider mix of land uses to facilitate overall development where there is less demand for traditional retail. So in 2015, our market analysis, which was then put into our comp plan, said that some of these sites, we may need to relook at some of the zoning and some of the standards. And this is kind of commercial district wide. So this could also apply to some of our central business district zones and some of our general commercial zones and community commercial zones, that we may need to take a look at some of those uses because we don't have the same market as we've always had. Even in 2015, we realized that regular brick and mortar retail and commercial wasn't being built very often, that there were other uses, other things that we might need to take a look at in allowing in certain zones to help make and create these kind of commercial nodes and centers that we desire.
You might need to get creative.
Yes. And frankly, one of those things could be more, and I'm just gonna, let you know, is it could be more residential. We, our part of our market analysis too showed that we had for our population a significant amount of commercial property. And especially given the changes of the pandemic and those kinds of things that we may have too much retail property, that we may need to make some adjustments to put some other additional uses in those zones.
So going away from exclusive commercial and having more mixed use, something more compact, those type of things.
If we went that direction, would we still be limited to 35 feet?
So as far as the zoning, we'll do a broad community stakeholder, outreach process. I think at that point, everything is on the table for analysis, right? So not only what the permitted uses are, but the dimensional standards, the setbacks, the height, those kinds of things as well as even, are some of the neighborhood commercial zones in the right location? Should they be something else?
Okay, I'll give you.
So I think everything's kind of on the table as far as what can be changed as a part of this.
As a resident of Lake Point, that chevron on Ruddle and Yelm, in that little section right there, there's a cleaners, there's a dog groomers, there's a restaurant, there's a coffee shop, there's a Subway, and I know this because I've walked to it many times. You know what I mean? And so there's a lot of it that is really working well because those fuel pumps are always active and they are always the traffic that they get and the business, the dollars that those businesses generate, it works well for those business owners. It works well for the people who live in the neighborhood across the street, the people who live here in the neighborhood behind it, the Thornberry people and the Lake Point people, and
people can walk to it.
People can walk to it. There's an apartment complex literally kitty corner to it. So it's not all bad. In this case, well, we'll leave that one alone, but I think some of it works out really well. But to hear you say that we might have too much, and that we might need to look at some of that as potential, mixed use residential with that it's good to hear.
Yeah. The other thing to think about too, and Hans will go through this when he does the inventory, is that a lot of these need a critical mass for a neighborhood commercial site to be successful. They need a critical mass of residential around them. They need a rooftops around them to be able to succeed. What we lack in Lacey oftentimes around neighborhood commercial sites is we lack the rooftops, but what we have are the vehicles. So if you think of certain neighborhood commercial sites like that one at Ruddle and Yelm Highway, chances are is the reason it really exists is because it's at an important crossroads, not because of the amount of residential that's around it. So in order for some of these to develop, I think what you'll see is that you're going to have some of those uses that generate, traffic coming in to be able to support them. So I think that's going to be a difficult conversation to have. If they are truly neighborhood focused, there may not be the market to support them. Versus if they were gaining, drive-by traffic as a result, then you might have that use that would be able to survive and be able to have something be actually built there.
Okay, so the reason why it thrives is because it's that intersection and the volume of traffic that goes by there, whereas Willamette, may not have that same volume to support that kind of.
Correct.
Okay. Even though, well, I guess in that area right there, I mean, the amount of rooftops since Horizon Point has gone in has like doubled, right? And so, but you don't have that out on Willamette, but you do kind of have that over on Marvin where that new Arco went in as a, you know, because there's also new development going up right there and a daycare center being built right there and so on. So by your rationale and what you're saying, that one has a higher chance of success than what may happen out on Willamette.
Right. What I'm saying is not all neighborhood commercial sites are created equal. Right? They're all in different locations around the city and they all have different factors that lead to their success or not.
Yeah, and when we get back to the inventory part, and Hans is going to go through that, you want to see how all these different designations have a little bit of difference to them.
Other thing is, oh, sorry, go ahead. I think this is such an important conversation to have because we're at the point where in our development as a city, where we're talking about densification of neighborhoods, we're talking about, you know, urban renewal in areas that, you know, to find better intended uses. And I think we're all committed to that path, but it's so important that we examine this and look for where these potential conflicts are and figure out as best we can how to make it a smoother process and be able to look down the road and keep our scrutiny on zoning as the city develops further in line with today. Because, you know, we're talking 80s and 90s regulations now that never envisioned what the way the city has developed. And it just, and that's at the retreat we had, that's what I meant by taking a holistic look at our zoning. And I'm glad we're starting with the neighborhood commercial here, but I think this is a really important place in our history as a city and we need to put great care and attention to it.
And then one thing I just want to just reinforce is talk about the 80s and 90s zoning, but that is reviewed as we do updates, as we do the 10-year cycle updates. We make sure there's consistencies. And really in terms of land, you know, commercial type uses, really the things that changed was the 2008 that you started seeing that retail environment change and what those uses are, and they're still trying to be defined. So before we went in and did things, we still were uncertain what exactly that mix would be. And this would be the opportunity.
Yeah, it's a challenge.
Hey guys, it used to be location, 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 and today it's location, location, Lacey. But we have to consider location, location, Google, because that influences everything, no matter where your business or residence is.
In the 80s, we didn't plan for the internet.
Right. We can plan for Google.
I just want to mention on this slide too, we've got a sustainable Thurston plan, which was adopted by the city back in 2013, also sets the goal that by 2035, that all 72% of all households in our region will be within a 15-minute walk of an urban center, corridor, or neighborhood center. So if you think about, that's why I showed the node map. It's within a 15-minute walk of every one of those nodes, whether that be, you know, Lacey Midtown or Crossroads or a neighborhood commercial site. So it requires the development of those commercial centers, but also the neighborhoods around them. And really that's a regional thing. And the idea is, you know, that prevents sprawl and that prevents, you know, driving and all those kinds of good things that these types of, that's why we, you know, why we plan to do this is so that we, you know, can prevent some of those secondary effects for that.
Allow people to walk less.
Trying to explain this.
Walk more, drive less. Yeah.
Trying to explain this one thing has been incredibly difficult because it's built in, and how do I say, you know, whether we like it or not, we have to meet this goal and we have to have walkable neighborhoods and we have to do this and we have to do that. And how that plays into what you're seeing being developed.
Right. And that's part of the Growth Management Act. And that whole discussion is, you know, it's a state planning framework that requires certain things. And, you know, we as a city are bound, basically mandated to do.
And just to emphasize that sustainable Thurston plan, it gets forgotten. And that's a mid-step too. There was an urban course task force recommendations. All this stuff is building foundations, going back to Lacey's plans, Midtown, all that stuff's related in these planning efforts, even the Martway corridor. to building towards this type of vision of compact urban neighborhoods, protected rural areas, all those different things.
I don't want to slow us down, but just curious, how close are we?
The line is going up slightly.
Oh, good.
It's a regional thing, right? So it takes less development in rural Thurston County and more development in and around these centers and corridors. And you continue to have kind of this push, in my mind, the rural area hasn't stopped developing, maybe like was originally visioned in the Sustainable Thurston Plan. There hasn't been a significant down zoning of the county. And so you continue to see a certain amount of rural development that kind of pushes down the urban numbers.
And there was a lot there. Yeah, and there was a lot of, well, but we're catching up because also when this was developing back in 08, there was an assessment, and part of it showed that we were behind and we're making some of those benchmarks, but it wasn't taking into account that there was a lot of vested plats and applications that were still being built out. So so now we're starting to see some more accurate numbers of how we're making progress.
You'll see the chart in probably your next TRPC meeting, because they show it about quarterly.
They do a report card that has it in it. So yeah. Next slide. Talk a little bit about that Meridian Market parcel and the history of that. As we're talking about this, I think it's important to consider the history of how that came to be in terms of why is it zoned that way, especially in preparation for the slides Han's going to go through in terms of the inventory. So just as a reminder, and council's aware of this, is that Meridian Campus was originally approved by Thurston County. That master plan was approved by Thurston County and then later annexed into the city of Lacey in 1992. If you go back to the original master plan, the Meridian Campus contained 2 commercial centers to support the community and adjacent neighborhoods. So that was originally a community commercial area and a neighborhood commercial area. And if you'll remember, the community commercial was rezoned a couple of years ago to be neighborhood commercial and high density around it. So now you have 2 neighborhood commercial centers, one at 31st and Willamette, and then the other at Campus Glen Drive and Willamette. Meridian Market parcel was redesignated. It was originally single family residential. It was redesignated about 20 years ago to neighborhood commercial through that master plan amendment process. The neighborhood commercial site originally was where the LFD Station 35 is today. And the idea with that was because the station was going on a neighborhood commercial parcel, they went through actually a quasi judicial process to locate there as an essential public facility. It took kind of taxable property off the rolls, and so it was added across the street where it's at today. So that was kind of a swap. It was through a master plan amendment process to relocate it to the other side of the road. And the reason for that was to support the goal of the master plan to provide a strong centralized community core, which was focused on a community park and shopping area. So it was always to be the community park, the schools, and the shopping kind of all in one general location. So it was not to be necessarily separated and isolated. It was to bring that community core. So again, talking about those focus areas and those nodes. There's one out in Meridian Campus around 31st and Willamette, Campus Glen and Willamette, that recognizes that this is to provide the strong centralized area for that part of town. So I'll turn it over to Hans, go through a little bit of the inventory.
Yeah, so this is going to be kind of a virtual drive-by of all of these locations. It's really just kind of a high-level investigation of what's out there today. It's really a snapshot in time. So we'll see that there are quite a few of them that are developed, but then also others that aren't. And this is really kind of going back to the zoning emphasis that this is looking forward in preparation for what these sites can be in the future and kind of taking advantage of that opportunity now. So within the city, we have 8 locations that are currently zoned neighborhood commercial, 3 of which are to the north of I-5. You can kind of see in there the little red specks on this map here. And then we have 5 to the south of I-5. And then we have another 3 in the urban growth area. We're not really going to get into those today, but they are out there. And then we're going to take a look at kind of an aerial view, a street view, and kind of a demographic snapshot. And all of these are kind of emphasizing that 15-minute walking radius. So about a half mile is about how much time it takes to travel, really kind of to get at that walking emphasis that these zone designations have right now. So the first one is actually located at Marvin Road and 41st Ave. It's a single parcel, approximately 6 acres in size. And the aerial view really kind of attempts to show what's immediately around these locations. So you'll notice that there's a lot of residential development in this photo, but then also in the other ones throughout this presentation, which is one of the emphases of this neighborhood style of commercial designation. And then as far as the types of zoning designations that are around it, we see a lot of open space and or residential development. We also included some snapshots of average daily trips, so vehicle traffic counts in these locations when we had them. Some of them are a little bit dated, so we do range from, I think, around 2016 up to 2021. Keep in mind that as we moved into kind of when COVID started taking place, those traffic numbers do get a little wonky as people started staying home. So it's not very cleanly apples to apples, but at least it gives you an idea of the general amount of activity that's going out in these zones, which is really what we're trying to look at today, is just how much activity is going on in the immediate vicinity of each one of these locations.
So that's north.
Yes.
Yeah, so and these aerials are not necessarily always north. They're just kind of captured in a way that shows what's around them as the best possible. So
subdivision on the other side is Jubilee, and then Edgewater is just to the, a little bit further to the north.
Is there supposed to be a water reservoir right there?
the water tower,
It's right below the lower part
So
of the
that's,
screen.
the white.
so if you take a
Circular.
right there, that's where Edgewater.
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
Gotcha. Okay.
And in these aerial views, we do have a north arrow in the corner to help orient a little bit, but some of these are going to be north is at the bottom of the page, so it's going to get a little weird. But moving on, this is a street view of what that location looks like. We're going to scroll through these a little bit because there's a lot of them. And then we did a demographic snapshot of just kind of what's going on there today. And again, this is within a half-mile radius, so approximately that 15-minute walking area within a distance of this location. So we have things, metrics like population, number of households, median age, median income and disposable income, things like this, so that we can really actually start comparing these. And one of the things that we're noticing is that while each one of these locations is really kind of seeking to address the same intent, there's a lot of differences between them. So how they're going about meeting that intent is really kind of different on a case by case and location by location basis.
Have there been any expressed interests in that property for neighborhood commercial?
In that one specifically?
There has, there's been people that, well, there's been some, you know, the ownership is the old Vic Wood, and been trying to sell us, we've been trying to figure out what can be going in there, how they can market it, but there has been some folks that just kind of looked at the property and nothing come in for any type of pre-sub or any type of official action yet.
And what was the, I'm sorry, what was the acreage of that plot?
6 acres.
6 acres.
It was 6.4 acres. And that one was an example of a single parcel zoning destination. Some of them are up to, I think, 6 or 7 parcels included as part of it. So they do really range in size and density and scale.
And one thing too about this is going back to Ryan's comment about, you know, vehicle travels by the site. Originally, that was in the center of the master plan, and they relocated it out to the arterial corners. You know, so that's another example of how they revised the minute the master plans over time to relocate that to a different location on the site.
That is a prime spot.
And the property just to the north of it, North Thurston Public Schools owns, they were planning on doing the new headquarters there last time I heard.
What is the estimated population of 41st Avenue North? Do we have that?
So we have a population number for those individuals that live within a half-mile radius of that location.
Okay.
So that's around just under 2,000 individuals, 700 households. And we'll send all of this out and make it available. So there is a lot of small text and a lot of details and stuff. So we'll definitely give you an opportunity to review it. Moving forward here, we have Meridian Market, which I imagine all of you are quite familiar with. This location is again a single parcel. At this time, it's only 1.5 acres. It's surrounded by a range of different residential developments and open space. And then the other thing that I will note is that each one of these locations has utility access, so sewer, water. And then also each one of them is also on a bus line. So
Is that a requirement for something to be zoned that way, or it just so happens?
So
they're
happens.
Yeah.
conveniently located with a bus line and the utilities already there?
It also speaks to consistency between our elements of our comp plan, where you have your land use and your transportation and your infrastructure all working together to be able to support those designations.
So it's definitely a good fit as for these types of uses to be paired up with that type of a service and something that's available there. I'm gonna start flashing theories a little bit faster, but this is a street view of what that looks like somewhat recently. Again, we have a snapshot of that location as far as population numbers. So we do see that that population is starting to grow there. There's a higher number of households, other metrics like that as well that we can compare across. So if there's other data points or things that we're interested in kind of looking at from a demographic perspective, from an economic perspective, from a development perspective, we kind of have a good amount of that information that we can kind of take a look at from a comparison standpoint and really kind of look at what's doing well at each one of these locations. Moving a little bit farther south, we have this location on Willamette Drive and 31st Avenue. This one is actually the southwest corner of a single parcel. So this one's actually not even a full parcel, but it's just a part of one parcel. It's approximately 2.8 acres of an 11-acre parcel. And then as far as average daily trips, we start to see that number growing a little bit as we're moving a little bit farther south there. And then as far as surrounding uses, we're starting to see higher density residential zoning designations, and then community office and other things like that starting to show up a little bit.
Wait, before we move on.
Yeah.
So just so I can orient myself to what I'm looking at.
Mhm.
Okay, so 31st is the same road that Department of Transportation just finished. And yeah, and where their new maintenance shed is at. And if you go across there, you take that all the way to Willamette, it goes all the way to Willamette, or it meets up.
So if you. Oh, go ahead.
Where's Cabela's?
Cabela's is south and west of.
Yeah,
the
so
location.
Cabela's is gonna be off your screen to the left and kind of down.
So this is Willamette and 31st, and just up the road is Meridian Market proposal. So this is still in the Willamette corridor. So if you take 31st and go off the screen to the left, eventually you'll get to Marvin Road, and then you'll get to cross and go to continue on to Gateway Boulevard and the DOT headquarters. So it's probably about a mile-ish away from that location.
Hans, the property right across the street from that is zoned community office.
So south of this location is community office.
We have offices there, like what is?
The office, the police chiefs and sheriffs.
The Community Action Council is out.
Oh, that's where the CAC is at?
Yep, yep.
Oh, okay.
And then across the street and the other side of Willamette, you see the tree parcel, that's also community office. And then you go up to the little complex that has the little coffee shop and the little office complex in there too.
Circular layout.
Daycare.
And so again, the design for, or the zoning for these parcels is designed so that we can have walkable, smaller community.
Yeah, so each one of these locations was selected based on its a general kind of lack of commercial style development that's zoned in those areas. So it is intended to be a smaller scale, commercial oriented, but definitely have that walkability emphasis as far as being able to be placed in kind of more residential areas without having kind of the full blown commercial style development.
Like
So
a
still,
UPS store.
yeah, so your basic maybe errands, or maybe you forgot something at the store, kind of when you're doing your regular kind of day-to-day stuff. It's kind of, run down the street style, kind of more development than you're going out and running full-blown.
Go across the freeway.
Right. So these are your kind of smaller scale, more local emphasis, household needs kind of thing. That you might not want to go to a full department store to get kind of thing. Whether or not that's a grocery store or, maybe like a small restaurant or something like that. That has more of that kind of neighborhood emphasis. And then this is again, a street view of that. location, and these three are currently undeveloped, but as everyone's familiar, there are development is in the works for at least Meridian Market right now. The rest of these, so these are the three to the north of I-5. Now we're actually going to shift to the south of I-5 for the rest of these. This is the demographic profile. But this is where you actually start to see a good number of these start to have a little bit more development. This is the side of town that's older neighborhoods. They've been there longer. There's more travel that's taking place in these areas. So they've had more time to build up and develop. So this location here is on the corner of College and Mullen. It's known as one of the buildings in there is kind of known as the farm. So there's a couple different office spaces in there.
You can kind of see Brian Johnson Academy and Camacho, Brian Johnson Academy.
There's a birth center in there.
Mhm.
Yeah. there's like
The
a big-
birth center's in my suite.
I guess that's something that's.
So this one is a total of 5.2 acres. It has, it's actually 5 parcels in total that are involved in this location. And then one other thing that we did do, and this is still very high level, and it doesn't kind of go very deep on this, but we did do a comparison of the total building value compared to the land value to get an idea of how developed each one of these zones is. So is the value in the buildings that are on site, or is the value still kind of in the property that's located there? For the first 3 that were undeveloped, all the value is going to be in the property that's there because there's nothing there. But as we see that these are progressively more and more developed, we see that that value shifts from the property to the actual structures that are located on it. And that gives us an idea of the likelihood that this will develop further in the future.
So when you say that, do you mean that if the improvement value is greater than the land value, that there's a likelihood that later on that there will be more development there?
The likelihood is if the value of the site is made up more, is represented more in the built structures that are there, the likelihood of it being redeveloped is lower than, say, if the land value is much higher than whatever investment is there currently.
So they'll still maintain investment in those structures, remodel them, those type of things.
Mhm.
But if the land value is greater than the structures, then it's more likely they'll tear that structure down and rebuild.
Something else.
Right. And given this is still very high level, so we haven't dug deeper into this yet, but just try to get an understanding for what is going on at each one of these locations. And the types of uses that are there today, just to get an idea of what's working at each one of these locations in comparison with each other.
If you look at that one too, and this one also, you see it's pretty well built out around it. However, just to the south, you see those trees, that parcel, that's a parcel that's zone moderate density. It's a small piece, but there's some more opportunity for some residential development in there as well.
Moderate.
Yeah, so that one's actually a split parcel there. So part of it is located within the residential commercial, and part of it is actually zoned. I believe that one's actually moderate density residential there to the south. So in this photo, south is actually to the top of the screen. So that's trying to make it as confusing as possible for everyone.
Thank you.
But yeah, moving right along here. So then when we do actually have businesses, we did actually take some time to figure out what is actually located at each one of these and list those out just to give you an idea of the types of businesses that are located there currently. And by extension, what we anticipate is doing well in each one of these locations. So for this site, we actually have some cosmetic studios, we have Sound Realty, financial planner, women's health, karate academy, coffee stand, auto-oriented, and then Edward Jones. So as an example of the types of uses that are kind of mesh well with this type of zoning designation.
A little historical too, that Brian Johnson Academy, before it was the Karate Academy, was a market, farmer's market, privately run farmer's market that was fairly
I wondered about
successful.
why that building looks the way that it does. It
Yeah,
makes sense
yeah.
in the market.
And they, then that, went away more for, not because of market demand, but the partnership kind of dissolved, and then that was kind of fell apart from that point, from the partner ownership side, not the market side.
I don't think the real estate office is there anymore.
Some of this was done just by a street view and looking at business licenses that were there. So some of this data, that is a good point, is a little bit dated, but it does still paint a picture of the types of uses that exist in each one of these locations. And again, we did a demographic profile for this one. So we see that population number is continuing to grow. So as one of the things that we'll notice is that as that population number grows and as the number of trips and travel in that area grow, these sites become more and more developed that we're looking at.
Yeah, the guy finally sold his farm. And yeah.
So that's another thing that we'll see there, but there's a lot of other metrics out there that we can factor into what we're looking at here, so. Moving on a little bit farther south from that location on College Still and 45th, we have this site. It is undeveloped. It is a single parcel and it's approximately 3 acres in size, and it's surrounded almost entirely by moderate density residential.
Now that's the same road that Rainier Vista is on?
Yes.
Yes.
So
And that's a street view of that one again. I'm gonna start jumping a little bit faster here. The Elm Highway, Ruddle Road, Thornberry Crossing was one that you were discussing earlier a little bit, I believe. And talking about some of the types of uses that are there. This one's almost a 6 acre site. Each one of those parcels that's there's 6 parcels in total, has development on it. The building to land ratio is around 76.8%. So of the total value, 76.8% of it is made up within the constructed buildings that are out there and not necessarily the land. And then the types of uses that we see around it are moderate density. And then there's some small slivers of open space directly next to it. But then if we look out in a broader sense, it's a lot more of that moderate or low density residential that we see.
A question, was there any complaints when the cannabis store went in there? I didn't hear any.
Yeah, I don't know of any. I haven't received any personally.
So this site, no, you're talking about an already developed site at this point, or?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, so this location, each one of the parcels that's included within this location has development on it. And the majority of the value of this total site is made up within the buildings that are built on this site right now.
There's a parcel just to the north that's also within this. That's
It's a doctor's office.
That's a converted house. So there's some redevelopment potential there someday in the future too.
Yeah, so it's not to suggest that it won't have further development by any means, but it's just another data point to kind of figure out where it's at compared to the other locations. And then
It's an idea of what can go in Willamette up north, but nobody really complained about that gas station when it went in. I mean, it's mind boggling.
The Chevron one.
Yeah,
How long
so
has Chevron been there, I wonder?
At least 2000.
40, 50 years.
Yeah, it's been there.
one of the older ones in town.
May not been a Chevron the whole time, but the gas station.
Yeah, so, and then as far as a list of types of uses that exist at this location, we have the Chevron, which did really kind of function for a good while as kind of the anchor in this location. But also other things like dry cleaning, H&R Block, nail, hair and tanning salons, dentists, doctors. We start to see some restaurants that show up in this location, insurance, physical therapy, coffee shops, chiropractic, veterinary hospitals. These are all the types of things. Given this is a little bit of an older one that's been around for a while and has had more opportunity to develop. But we start to see these types of uses that pop up in this zoning designation and this type of use. And then we have, again, another snapshot of demographic for this one. So households and population are growing, still growing, as you kind of see that higher development pattern here. And then moving a little bit farther on Yelm Highway, we have Horizon Point, which is this location. It is 7.2 acres, percent developed is around 83.5. It's a total of 4 parcels that make up this zone. As far as current uses, in kind of directly surrounding it, we see open space. This is actually right on the county line too. So just to the bottom of the screen here is Thurston County. So there's a railroad that runs right through there. But we see residential style development within the immediate proximity.
No, this is a storage facility that just went in a few years ago.
Right.
Yep. So to the right hand of the screen is the storage facility. And then I chose this photo because it's one of the more recent aerials that we have that actually starts to show the commercial element of it. that is some kind of, I don't know if we have a specific tenant or what that use is gonna be, but it's some kind of miscellaneous commercial services is the general designation, but that could be anything from kind of a neighborhood, neighborhood
So this,
supply.
this
Things
neighbor,
on that long list.
this neighborhood commercial is a little bit unique because it's tied to the Horizon Point Village Center master plan. So the Village Center had a provisions in there that they could go through a master plan amendment to look at these uses. So that's where the self-storage came in. But as part of the approval was they wanted to make sure there was a retail component to service the neighbor to meet the intent of it. So that's why they required the development of that retail building. I don't think there are any current, prospective tenants yet,
Yeah.
but that is something that was a requirement to make sure that you had that connectivity to the Village Center. So it's a little bit unique in terms of entitlement and allowed uses because of that Village Center designations of over different zoning classification.
Yep. And then this is a street view, just to give you an idea of what that location looks like. This given predates the construction of the building on the right there. You can start to see what that's forming into. Again, we did demographic data for this one. I'm gonna skip over this at this point. And then we have a location at Mullen Road and Carpenter Road. This one has, Interlake Grocery is located right there on the left side of that roundabout. This location is made up by a total of 4 parcels. It's around 5 acres in total as far as size. And then it is almost entirely surrounded by low density residential with the school just off to along Carpenter Road there to the north. And then this is a street view of what that looks like. And then again, we did the demographic profile to just get a sense of the amount of individuals and households that are within a half-mile radius of that location. We're starting to see that number drop off a bit. So the grocery has been there for a long time, but the parcels on the other side of the roundabout there are still open and available. And then this is kind of some summary initial findings. We already ran through how many locations are there. But as far as size and numbers of parcels, they range from about 1.5 acres to around 7.2 acres in size. And everything from a portion of a single parcel up to 6 parcels. So these zones really are different from each other, even though they are still trying to meet the same types of needs and uses. And then as far as undeveloped locations, we did a quick summary here. Average population for undeveloped locations is around just over 3,000 people live within a half-mile radius. And then average daily trips, so amount of traffic that takes place within those undeveloped locations right now is just under 14,000 trips per day on an average basis. Shifting over to the developed locations, we see both the population and the number of trips jump. So about 1,000 more people within that half-mile radius generally live within the developed locations. And then that average daily trips really jumps up. So that's 26,000 by comparison. So you kind of see the amount of activity that's necessary to really kind of start to support these neighborhood style commercial developments. And then, as I mentioned earlier, all of these locations have utility and transit access or services directly adjacent to each one of the sites. And with that,
Yeah. So kind of going back to why we're here tonight, kind of what some of these next steps could look like if council wants to direct the planning commission or direct this to be a portion of the planning commission work program. And as Ryan and Hans perfectly illustrated, one of the consistent things about our neighborhood commercial designation in our city, they're all very, they're very unique from each other. There's some site, differences or some characteristic differences. All those different pieces and demographic differences that kind of make it a little bit more difficult to just do a universal one size fits all designation and uses. So what we're kind of looking to do is propose, and one of the things too, as a result of hearing the feedback from the process of the Meridian Market, is that one of our first steps after Hans and Ryan put together this cursory information is now to go out potentially and have some listening sessions out in the neighborhoods around these specific designations, so that since we are unique, we want to make sure we're going to each designation, kind of get a sense of what the neighborhoods would like to see there. it's gonna be tough to purely predict what's the right type of unit, over 20 years, but really get a sense of what are the things that they're looking for and have that feedback before we put any type of pen to paper. And then from that, we would take a review of that information, brief the planning commission, brief the land use and environment committee, council committee, visually develop plans and alternatives. Through that process, we'll be, communicating with the planning commission and eventually go back out to the neighborhoods for, is this on the right track? What do you think? Get that feedback, and then come back to the planning commission, land use committee, and do some briefings, and eventually hold the public hearing to planning commission to make a recommendation to council. Now, that's just a quick overview of a process and a broad outline. Something like this is going to be very intensive. I go back to the neighborhood forums. We're going to have multiple forums at each one of those designations, and focusing probably on the northeast area first, because those are those undeveloped portions, and then moving to that 37th and College. The other part of this review too is not only what type of uses or design standards, but what are the designations still appropriate? So some of these may be in close proximity of each other. Look at the College Street designations. You have the 45th and the 37th. I mean, they're just right close. Is that appropriate? Is it something that better you should be thinking of to get kind of that feedback through this process?
Rick, is it possible you can have two different types of neighborhood commercial?
Yes, that's with their unique characteristics of doing this type of approach. We could have a maybe neighborhood commercial, but based on the neighborhood it's in, and have it classified that way. But those are all things that, we don't really know the outcomes. We know kind of ways it could come out, but we want to have that conversation and feedback with the residents in and around those areas to kind of get a sense of what they're thinking, or if they even know about those parcels being designated in that way. Kind of like we talked about earlier, that challenge of how do we get people to understand what could happen around them, and what are the best way to get involved in that conversation. So that's kind of an approach that we're suggesting. Again, it could take 8 to 12 months plus, depending on some of the other processes. And it will take some significant staff time, at least 2,000 hours of FTE. And of course, coupled that with some of the other priorities, some of the other work programs, upcoming conferencing plan updates in 2025. And then you also have the inquiries that we'll be talking about probably in January related to mobile home parks as well. So there's a lot going on, but this is something that they'll want to put it before the council. If they do want the planning commission to take this on, and so then we'll have to figure out how we balance those other priorities as well as staffing resources.
Discussion.
Yes.
Mike, please.
I don't think we have the luxury of time. I think community outpour has been overwhelmingly. We need to do something to stop the bleeding so we can start the healing. And with that being said, I know we don't normally take action at work sessions, but I'm going to make a motion and look for a second. And this is my motion. I'd move to place a moratorium to pause the allowance of convection stores, convenience stores, gas stations, variety stores as permitted uses under the neighborhood commercial district zone until a full review and public process can be conducted. Anyone second? All right, well, my opinion is that we're part of the problem then.
I really appreciate the effort and time that you folks have put into this. I think it's going to be helpful to get more public feedback prior to making any big decisions. I think that's the key here. I think that's the reason why we're here today, is to talk about that and to get more public feedback from these potential development sites so that we have some kind of understanding of what should go and what shouldn't. What does the neighborhood want next to their house?
Yeah. And so, the intent of tonight has been to, get understanding and maybe provide some course of direction to, how do we want to look at these zones in the future? So, I remember it was the mayor who just a couple of weeks or council meetings ago said, we need to take another look at what we've got and what we can do with it. And here staff is suggesting that, hey, we're ready to take a look. It's going to cost us this, and the timeline is going to be this. And if I know that we've got we're short-staffed and your guys' departments are already doing a lot. You know, and I appreciate you guys showing up saying, hey, we're coming to do more. I don't know how you're gonna do more, but it looks like what you guys are asking us to do is say, hey, go spend the time, effort, energy, and dollars to go out and examine each of these places that we have left, what we have remaining, to see exactly, you know, how the community feels about it, what they would like to see, what it will hold, what it will withstand. And, you know, I don't know if we can, do we need to forward this to the full council? Can we take that action, or is this just a recommendation?
This is guidance, but
This is guidance.
but I think what you're talking about is putting this as.
We can do whatever we want. We're the council.
I think what you're recommending is putting this as part of the planning commission work plan, correct?
Right, this is putting it on the work plan, and then we'll have to figure out how and it may adjust some of the other priorities in council, and even to inform some of the conversations like what you're going through with the results of your retreat. But this is something this is what we would take, and knowing what the community conversation we just experienced and the council experience with Meridian Market. And I think going back several months, you know, in a council meeting I talked about, we were planning on having this conversation about how to have this conversation with the community. So
hey guys, how is it?
You want to add it to the planning work program, then we'll.
How are communities going to feel if between now and us doing all this, someone drops another permit for a gas station and convenience store, or something that the neighbors don't want? And then we have to go through this whole thing all over again. You know what I mean? We need to put a stop to it temporarily until we get our act together.
You know, one thing we can do about Councilmember Stedman's, we can even come back at another time, just talk specifically about moratorium, those processes. What are the things that have criteria has to meet to qualify? And so we can bring that back to the council, so you have a little bit more understanding what that process is and what it means, and if it's an action that the council would like to consider.
Okay, so we definitely need to do that.
Because I hear what you're saying, Mike, but I don't feel like I have enough information about what that process looks like to make a decision tonight.
But I understand that, I get it, but the only thing we need to understand is someone can drop a permit tomorrow and do the same exact thing while we're doing our red tape stuff. We need to stop it temporarily so it doesn't happen again.
If there's a situation that comes to the attention of the council, one of the steps of the moratorium is you could take quick action, but follow it up with the public hearing process. But we can also lay that process out at either a council committee level or a future council work session, so you guys have understand what that steps are, what the criteria.
At least that's something. We have to do something here, guys. I'm trying to be the voice of reason. The citizens and the residents that vote us in are tired of it. Hundreds of them. I mean, come on. We have to listen to them.
So we will have to do that with the full council. And so but what we.
No, we don't. We are the council. We can do whatever we want as long as we have 4 people out of the 7 to make a decision. Or in this case, 2 people missing, 3 of the 4.
Then we're recommending is to make sure that we're fully aware of what it means to do an emergency moratorium, what the timelines are required, what's expectation of staff that has to do the work, and bring information back to you to make a decision under that law. So I think it's appropriate to go back at another work session, just explain that process, and then we'd have another touch point.
And it does change timelines for responses and things of that nature.
If we're gonna do something like that, it's important we don't do it haphazardly and we follow the law. It's a little premature and
Okay, so we had a
And
motion.
we can tell the citizens when they come to us, the first meeting after someone drops an application, that we could have done something when we didn't. But you know what? The last thing Rick said, at least it's something.
And we will. So as of now, you're asking for guidance on whether the Community Economic Development Department and Planning Commission should begin the review of the Neighborhood's Commercial Designation Implementation Ordinance, LMC 16.36, including public engagement strategy to receive neighborhood input. And My only question is, what kind of public engagement strategy are we talking about?
Well, when we talk about neighborhood forums, we be trying to figure out how we can set up out in those neighborhoods, locations. So like it's easy out in the Willamette area, we can probably use Salish Middle School, but also now with technology, we have other ways to bring
goes to
mobile
hybrid
hybrid model with the OWL
Yeah.
technology, those type of things, and get the word out. And of course, I think those neighborhoods out there especially are pretty well engaged right now that we get the word out. There's going to be people to be aware and be able to join and have that conversation. So that first session really is going to be a little bit like the presentation that Ryan Hans just gave, and then get feedback on, and maybe not be all the districts, but just theirs, and kind of get feedback. And some of it's going to be listening, because we need to let them also vent, especially out in that area, and ask questions about process and the last decision as well. So there's going to be some.
Will the assistant city manager be involved?
Yes, we'll be coordinating with public affairs and developing a strategy and how we communicate and continue that process and keep that language in.
Good, because she's good at it. Yep. Okay, so
sorry, I forgot to mention that, and we've had talked about it a little bit, and we'll be, as we take that outline, we'll be refining it and formatting those outreach efforts.
So then, are you guys in favor of this recommendation and this
It
guidance?
seems very obvious that we should
Okay.
make this investment.
Then we need to move forward with this. Do you need a motion or anything?
I
like
think
that?
we understand what to do.
Okay, so if that's one course of action that we are going to take, I guess the next thing would be to please give us the information that we need to potentially do some type of moratorium or bring to a halt, further development until, we could, something that we can do to just, I guess, give us the steps and background that we need to,
So my understanding is we're looking for direction from the public,
well,
not necessarily a moratorium, but a direction from the public.
yeah, so guidance from the public on, the development of the rest of what we've got.
Yeah.
And in order to do that, we're gonna have to start this process, but
Maybe we should put a time limit on it or a timetable so people at least know there's an end in sight and that we're serious about getting to a solution rather than having it long drawn out to where, again, someone can drop an application at any time.
do we have room in our next work session?
I don't know what the agenda is for next, but we'll figure out how to do that.
Okay.
And one thing too, with the process that we're looking at and going area by area and focus on undeveloped areas first, we can get some early feedback and get a sense. And then also too, depending on if it's a change to a comp plan, we're not going to have to package it up for a future, but if it's a change to an implementation code that still would be consistent with the comp plan, we can take actions throughout the year. So it could be a evolving process. It makes it more challenging sometimes, but we have that early on in that process, and we can come back at the next most available work session and talk about the moratorium.
All right,
steps
so
as well.
all in favor of this guidance, please say aye.
Nay.
Opposed? No, no one nay. Okay, and with that, we have reached the end of our agenda after a 3-hour session. And I just want to thank everybody for hanging out and then staying around and sticking around and, helping us iron out and get through these 2 agenda items, which didn't really seem like much, but they really did turn out to be a lot. So I'm glad that we had all of this engagement and a very good conversations. And I look forward to, the next one where we follow up on this and make sure that these things get into place. So if there are no objections, I will call this meeting adjourned.
I'll just say, I know you guys listened and I appreciate that, but I'm going to fight for what I think is right.
Please come talk to all of us. Keep it classy, Lacey.
You know I love y'all.